2. Quentin Roosevelt. And all airmen, friend and foe alike, WHO have fallen in clean fighting. The world was a puddle of gloom and of shadowy things. He sped till the red and the gold of invisible day was burnish and flames to the undermost spread of his wings, so he outlighted the stars as he poised in the grey. Nearer was he to the knowledge and splendor of God, mysteries sealed from the ken of the ancient and wise, beauties forbidden to those who are one with the clod. All that there was of the truth was revealed to his eyes. Flickers of fire from the void and the whistle of death. Clouds that snapped blackly beneath him, above and beside. Watch him, serene and uncaring, holding your breath, fearing his peril and all that may come of his pride. Now he was swooped to the world like a bird to his nest, now is the drone of his coming the roaring of hell, now with a splutter and crash are the engines at rest, all's well. E.W. Contents. Page A. The Case of Lasky 1E. Puppies of the Pack 21E. The Coming of Muller 40 IV. The Strafing of Muller 58 Vanny. The Gun 76 VI. The Law Breaker and Frightfulness 100 V. The Man Behind the Circus 130 VIII. A Question of Rank 157 IXA. Reprisal Raid 191X. The Last Load 220 TAMO. The Scoots. Chapter ITHE. Case of Lasky. Lieutenant Bridgeman went out over the German line and strafed a depot. He stayed a while to locate a new gun position and was caught between 3 strong batteries of Archies. Reports, said the wing commander. Well, Bridgeman isn't back and Tam said he saw him nosedive behind the German trenches. So the report was made to headquarters and headquarters sent forward a long account of air flights for publication in the day's communique, adding, one of our machines did not return. But, doot if he's killit, said Tam. He flattened doot before he reached airth and flew around a bit. Ye know ask Mr. Lasky, sir he's just in. Mr. Lasky was a bright-faced lad who, in ordinary circumstances, might have been looking forward to his leaving book from Eton, but now had to his credit divers bomb dumps and 3 enemy airmen. He met the brown-faced, red-haired, awkwardly built youth whom all the flying corps called Tam. Ah, Tam, said Lasky reproachfully, I was looking for you, I wanted you badly. Tam chuckled. Thought so, he said, but was not so far frae the aerodrome when yon feller chased you. I was chasing him, said the indignant Lasky. Oh, aye, replied the other skeptically. And was ye wantin' the scoot to help ye chase ane puir wee hoon? Sir think shame on ye for missussin' the puir laddie. There were 4, protested Lasky. And ye're gun jammed, I'm thinkin', CWI, rare presence o' mind, ye stood oop in the fuselage and hit the nearest representative of the Imperial German Air Service a crack over the hide WI, a spanner. A little group began to form at the door of the mess room, for the news that Tam the Scoot was up was always sufficient to attract an audience. As for the victim of Tam's irony, his eyes were dancing with glee. Dismayed or frightened by this apparition of the Superman the air continued Tam in the monotonous tone he adopted when he was evolving one of his romances, the enemy fled, Emmett spare KS and Vapare to hide them from the vigilant EEO young Mr. Lasky, the boy avenger, or the terror o' the firmament. They darted hither and the ether WI, their remorseless pursuer on their heels and the sinister sound of his bullets whistlin' in their lugs. Ane by ane the enemy is defeated, faying like Lucifer in a flamin' shroud. Suddenly Mr. Lasky turns vera pale. Heavens! A thought has struck him. Where is Tam the Scoot? The horror o' the thought leaves him breathless, and back he turns and, like a hawk deep swiftly but gracefully into the aerodrome, saved. Bravo, Tam! They gave him his due reward with great hand clapping and Tam bowed left and right, his forage cap in his hand. Folks, he said, ma next performance will be duly announced. Tam came from the Clyde. He was not a shipbuilder, but was the assistant of a man who ran a garage and did small repairs. Nor was he, in the accepted sense of the word, a patriot, because he did not enlist at the beginning of the war. His boss suggested he should, but Tam apparently held other views, went into a shipyard and was badged and reserved. They coned him out of that, and he went to another factory, making a false statement to secure the substitution of the badge he had lost. He was unmarried and had none dependent on him, and his landlord, who had 2 sons fighting, suggested to Tam that though he'd hate to lose a good lodger, he didn't think the country ought to lose a good soldier. Tam changed his lodgings. He moved to Glasgow and was insulted by a fellow workman with the name of Coward. Tam hammered his fellow workman insensible and was fired forthwith from his job. Every subterfuge, every trick, every evasion and excuse he could invent to avoid service in the army, he invented. He simply did not want to be a soldier. He believed most passionately that the war had been started with the sole object of affording his enemies opportunities for annoying him. Then one day he was sent on a job to an aerodrome workshop. He was a clever mechanic and he had mastered the intricacies of the engine which he was to repair, in less than a day. He went back to his work very thoughtfully, and the next Sunday he bicycled to the aerodrome in his best clothes and renewed his acquaintance with the mechanics. Within a week, he was wearing the double-breasted tunic of the higher life. He was not a good or attractable recruit. He hated discipline and regarded his superiors as less than equals, but he was an enthusiast. When Pangate, which is in the south of England, sent for pilots and mechanics, he accompanied his officer and flew for the first time in his life. In the old days he could not look out of a 4th-floor window without feeling giddy. Now he flew over England at a height of 6,000 feet, and was sorry when the journey came to an end. In a few months he was a qualified pilot, and might have received a commission had he so desired. "Thank ye, Sir R," he said to the commandant, "but ye ken we'll no gentry." Fairther was no believer in education, and, whilst other laddies were living on meal at the University was earning salt at the Govan Iron Works. No, a society mon ye ken, odd be us in the wrong knife to eat that would bring the corp into disrepute. His education had, as a matter of fact, been a remarkable one. From the time he could read, he had absorbed every boy's book that he could buy or borrow. He told a friend of mine that when he enlisted he handed to the care of an acquaintance over 600 paper-covered volumes which surveyed the world of adventure, from the Nevada of Deadwood Dick to the Australia of Jack Harkaway. He knew the stories by heart, their phraseology and their construction, and was wont at times, half in earnest, half in dour fun, at his own expense, to satirize everyday adventures in the romantic language of his favorite authors. He was regarded as the safest, the most daring, the most venomous of the scouts, those swift-flying Spitfires of the clouds, and enjoyed a fame among the German airmen which was at once flattering and ominous. Once they dropped a message into the aerodrome. It was short and humorous, but there was enough truth in the message to give it a bite. "Let us know when Tam is buried, we would read subscribe." Officers, German Imperial Air Service. Section, nothing ever pleased Tam so much as this unsolicited testimonial to his prowess. He purred for a week. Then he learned from a German prisoner that the author of the note was the flyer of a big aviatic, and went and killed him in fair fight at a height of 12,000 feet. "It was an engrossin' and thrillin' fight," explained Tam. "The bluid was coursin' in ma veins, ma heart was palpitatin' suppressed emotion. Roond ain't another," the dauntless airman caracled, "the no above, the no below the other." "We, super be resolution Tam o' the scoot's nose dived for the wee feller's tail, losin' a drum at the puir body as he endeavoured to escape the lichtenant swoop o' the intrepid Scotsman. We, matchless skill, Tam o' the scoots banked over and brought the gallant miscreant to terra firma, puir laddie. If he'd kept ben the hoose he'd no, be lyin' daid the nicht. God rest him." You might see Tam in the early morning, when the world was dark and only the flashes of guns revealed the rival positions, poised in the early sun, 14,000 feet in the air, a tiny spangle of white, smaller in magnitude than the fading stars. He seems motionless, though you know that he is traveling in big circles at 70 miles an hour. He is above the German lines and the fleecy bursts of shrapnel and the darker patches where high explosive shells are bursting beneath him, advertise alike his temerity and the indignation of the enemy. What is Tam doing there so early? There has been a big raid in the dark hours. A dozen bombing machines have gone buzzing eastward to a certain railway station where the German troops waited in readiness to reinforce either RB fronts. If you look long, you see the machines returning, a group of black specks in the morning sky. The Boches scouts are up to attack. The raiders go serenely onward, leaving the exciting business of dual elutrance to the nippy fighting machines which fly above each flank. One such fighter throws himself at 3 of the enemy, diving, banking, climbing, circling and all the time firing, ticka, 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 through his propellers. The fight is going badly for the bold fighting machine, when suddenly like a hawk, Tammo the scout sweeps upon his prey. One of the enemy side slips, dives and streaks to the earth, leaving a cloud of smoke to mark his unsubstantial path. As for the others, they bank over and go home. One falls in spirals within the enemy's lines. Rescuer and rescued land together. The fighting machine pilot is Lieutenant Burnley, the observer, shot through the hand, but cheerful, is Captain Forson. Did ye know, feel a sense o' gratitude to th' Almighty when you kent it were Tam sittin' aloft like a wee angel. I thought it was a bombing machine that had come back, said Burnley untruthfully. Did ye hear that, Sir R.S.? asked Tam wrathfully. For a grown officer and gentleman holding the certificate of the Royal Flying Corps, to think ma machine were a bomber. Did ye know, look oop and see me. Did ye know, look thankfully at yer observer, when, a hurricane roar, the terror of the air hurtled across the sky, saved. Ye said to yourself, saved, and, by Tam. What can I do to show ma appreciation of the hero's devotion? Why, ye said to yourself, suddenly, why? Algi, him a box o' cigars sent to me by ma rich uncle fra, Glasgow. You can have 2 cigars, Tam, I'll see you to the devil before I give you any more, I only had 50 in the first place. 2's no, many, said Tam calmly, but I've na doot I'll enjoy them ma educated palate better than you, Sir R, cigars are for men and, no, for bairns, and, ye'd save yourself, and awfu, feelin' no sickness if ye gave me a. Tam lived with the men, he had the rank of sergeant, but he was as much Tam to the private mechanic as he was to the officers. His pay was good and sufficient. He had shocked that section of the Corps Comforts Committee which devoted its energies to the collection and dispatch of literature, by requesting that a special effort be made to keep him supplied, latest Bluids. A member of the committee with a sneaking regard for this type of literature took it upon himself to ransack London for penny dreadfuls, and Tam received a generous stock with regularity. No, so fond o' new style, he said, the detective story is vera guide in its way for hame consumption, but prefer the mere primitive descriptions, of how that grand mon, Deadwood Dick, foiled the machinations of Black Peter, the scourge of Hell Canyon. I've no sort o' use for the new kind o' story, the love stories aboot Mooney. Ye ken the sort, Herilda's feelin' fine and anxious aboot Lady Gwendolyn's birthmark, is she the rectfu heir? Oh, heaven help me to solve the mystery. To be continued in or next. I'm all for Bluid and fine laddies a 6-shooter in every hand and a bowie knife in their teeth, it's no, so intellectual, but, mon, it's mere human. Tam was out one fine spring afternoon in a 1-seater moraine. He was on guard watching over the welfare of 2 spotters, who were correcting the fire of a grandmother battery. There was a fair breeze blowing from the east, and it was bitterly cold, but Tam in his leather jacket, muffled to the eyes, and with his hands in fur-lined gloves and with the warmth from his engine, was comfortable without being cozy. Far away on the eastern horizon he saw a great cloud. It was a detached and imperial cumulus, a great frothy pyramid that sailed in majestic splendor. Tam judged it to be a mile across at its base and calculated its height, from its broad base to its feathery spire-like apex, at another mile. There's an awfu, lot of room in ye, he thought. It was moving slowly toward him and would pass him at such a level that did he explore it, he would enter halfway between its air foundation and its peak. He signaled with his wireless, "I'm going to explore cloud," and sent his moraine climbing. He reached the misty outskirts of the mass and began its encirclement, drawing a little nearer to its center with every circuit. Now he was in a white fog which afforded him only an occasional glimpse of the earth. The fog grew thicker and darker and he returned again to the outer edge because there would be no danger in the center. Gently he declined his elevator and sank to a lower level. Then suddenly, beneath him, a short shape loomed through the mist and vanished in a flash. Tam had a tray of bombs under the fuselage, something in destructive quality between a Mills grenade and a 3-inch shell. He waited. Presently, swish. They were circling in the opposite direction to Tam, which meant that the object passed him at the rate of 140 miles an hour. But he had seen the German coming. Something dropped from the fuselage, there was the rending crash of an explosion and Tam dropped a little, swerved to the left and was out in clear daylight in a second. Back he streaked to the British lines, his wireless working frantically. Enemy raiding squadron in cloud, take the edge a quarter up. He received the acknowledgement and brought his machine around to face the lordly bulk of the cumulus. Then the British Archies began their good work. Shrapnel and high explosives burst in a storm about the cloud. Looking down he saw 50 stabbing pencils of flame flickering from 50 AA guns. Every available piece of anti-aircraft artillery was turned upon the fleecy mass. As Tam circled he saw white specks rising swiftly from the direction of the aerodrome and knew that the fighting squadron, full of fury, was on its way up. It had come to be a tradition in the wing that Tam had the right of initiating all attack, and it was a right of which he was especially jealous. Now, with the great cloud disgorging its shadowy guests, he gave a glance at his Lewis gun and drove straight for his enemies. A bullet struck the fuselage and ricocheted past his ear, another ripped a hole in the canvas of his wing. He looked up. High above him, and evidently a fighting machine that had been hidden in the upper banks of the cloud, was a stiffly built Fokker. "No, Lasky," said Tam and nose-dived. Something flashed past his tail, and Tam's machine rocked like a ship at sea. He flattened out and climbed. The British Archies had ceased fire and the fight was between machine and machine, for the squadron was now in position. Tam saw Lasky die and glimpsed the flaming wreck of the boy's machine as it fell, then he found himself attacked on two sides. But he was the swifter climber, the faster mover. He shot impartially left and right and below, there was nothing above him after the first surprise. Then something went wrong with his engines, they missed, started, missed again, went on, then stopped. He had turned his head for home and begun his glide to earth. He landed near a road by the side of which a Highland battalion was resting and came to ground without mishap. He unstrapped himself and descended from the fuselage slowly, stripped off his gloves and walked to where the interested infantry were watching him. "Where are ye gone?" he asked, for Tam's besetting vice was an unquenchable curiosity. "To the trenches of Fort Massel, sir," said the man he addressed. "Ye'll know, be callin' me, sir," reproved Tam. "As arrogant. Hoo lang will 'e stay in the trenches up yon?" "4 days, sergeant," said the man. "4 days, guide lord," answered Tam. Wouldn't do that work for £1,000 a week." "It's no so bad," said half a dozen voices. "Oots vera dangerous," said Tam, shaking his head. Thank it fu, no, a soldier, they tried hard to make me ain, but said, no, laddie, gie me a job." Woo! A roar like the rush of an express train through a junction, and Tam looked around in alarm. The enemy's heavy shell struck the ground midway between him and his machine and threw up a great column of mud. "Mon," said Tam in alarm. Thought it were goin' straight for Maui machine." "What happened to you, Tam?" asked the wing commander. Tam cleared his throat. "Patrollin' by order the morn," he said. "Ma suspicions were aroused by the erratic movements of a ground cloud. To think, Tam the scoot, was to act. Wi'd a thocht for his ain personal safety, the gallant laddie brocht his machine to the cloud circling through its umbrageous depths. It was a fine gay sicht, alunai, sky, he ventured into the lion's den. What did he see? The cloud was a nest o' wee hornets. Slippin' a bomb he dashed madly back to the outer sendin' his baith hands, thanks to his. He stopped and bit his lip thoughtfully. "Come, Tam," smiled the officer, "that's a lame story for you." "Oh, aye," said Tam. No, in the wrecked spirit, who mony did we lose? Mr. Lasky and Mr. Brand, said the wing commander quietly. Queer laddies, said Tam. He sniffed. Mr. Lasky was a bonny lad, I'll ask ye to excuse me, Captain Thompson, Sir R. No feelin' vera weel the day, ye've no a seagar aboot ye that ye willna be wantin'. Chapter 2. Puppies of the Pack. Tam was not infallible, and the working out of his great thoughts did not always justify the confidence which he reposed in them. His idea of an invisible aeroplane, for example, which was to be one painted sky blue that would harmonize the blue skies, was not a success, nor was his scheme for the creation of artificial clouds attended by any encouraging results. But Tam's attack formation for bombing enemy depots attained to the dignity of print, and was confidentially circulated in French, English, Russian, Italian, Serbian, Japanese and Romanian. The pity is that a Scottish edition was not prepared in Tam's own language, and Captain Blackie, who elaborated Tam's rough notes and condensed into a few lines Tam's most romantic descriptions, had suggested such an edition for very private circulation. It would have begun somewhat like this. The Hooner Gairman is a vera bonny fictor, but he has nae initiative. He squints oop in the mornin', he spears a fine machine o'er by his lines. Hoot! Says he, yon wee feller is Scottish, thinkin', go you, Fritzen, Hansen, Karlen, Heinrich, and strafe the queer body. Nay, says his Unterleutnant. Neen, he says, ye don't know what you're askin', Herr Lieutenant. What's wrong ye, says the Oberleutnant. Are ye German heroes or just low doon Austrians that ye fear ain we bairdy? Lieutenant, say they, yon feller is Tam o' the Scoots, the brigand o' the stars. Eck, he says. Gang oop, ain o ye, and ask the lad to coom doon and talk, a soup us, we maun keep on the wrecked side o' Tam. All this and more would have gone to form the preliminary chapter of the true version of Tam's code of attack. He's a rum bird, is Tam, said Captain Blackie at breakfast. He brought down von Zeidlitz yesterday. Is von Zeidlitz down? Demanded half a dozen voices, and Blackie nodded. He was a good, clean fighter, said young Carter regretfully. When did you hear this, sir? This morning, through H.Q. Intelligence. Tam will be awfully bucked, said somebody. He was complaining yesterday that life was getting too monotonous. By the way, we ought to drop a wreath for poor old von Zeidlitz. Tam will do it with pleasure, said Blackie. He always liked von Zeidlitz. He called him Fritz Fokker, ever since the day von Zeidlitz nearly got Tam's tail down. An officer standing by the window with his hands thrust into his pockets called over his shoulder. Here comes Tam. The thunder and splutter of the scout's engine came to them faintly as Tam's swift little machine came skimming across the broad ground of the aerodrome, and in a few minutes Tam was walking slowly toward the office, stripping his gloves as he went. Blackie went out to him. Hello, Tam, anything exciting? Tam waved his hand, he never saluted. Will ye gang an talk, a look at me instruments? He asked mysteriously. Why, Tam, will ye, Sir R? Captain Blackie walked over to the machine and climbed up into the fuselage. What he saw made him gasp, and he came back to where Tam was standing, smug and self-conscious. You've been up to 28,000 feet, Tam? Asked the astonished Blackie. Why, that is nearly a record. A doot ma barometer, said Tam, if a were no, at 40,000, I'm a Boche. Blackie laughed. You're not a Boche, Tam, he said, and you haven't been to 40,000 feet, no human being can rise 8 miles. To get up 5.5 miles is a wonderful achievement. Why did you do it? Tam grinned and slapped his long gloves together. For peace and quiet, he said. I've been chased by 30 air hoons that got, twixt me and ma breakfast, so went oop a bit more'n, 2 fellers came behind me. There's an old joke that I've never understood before, the higher the fewer, it's no difficult to understand it no. You got back all right, anyhow, said Blackie. Alunai, the vast and silent spaces of the vaulted heavens, said Tam in his sing-song tones which invariably accompanied his narratives. The young avenger of the Cluds, Tam the Scoot, focht his ficht. Attacked by overwhelming forces, shot at a foreign, the hint, the noble laddie didna lose his nerve. Mutterin a vera brief, prayer that the hoons would be strafed, he klimped till he could, struck a match on the moon. After him set lips and, flashin' een came the bluidy-minded ravagers of Belgium, Serbia and, Fried, Romania. Fear bullets whistled about his lugs but his eyes were bricked, his hairt were licked, for Tam the Scoot was ficht, that's a wee poema, made oot o' ma ain hide, Captain, at a height of 23,000 feet. I'm thinkin' it's the highest poem in the world and you're not far wrong. Well, what happened? Got hame, said Tam grimly, and, no yon hoons did no, get hame. Mon. It took him an awfu, long time to fa. He went off to his breakfast and later, when Blackie came in search for him, he found him lying on his bed smoking a long black cigar, his eyes glued to the pages of Texas Tom, or the Road Agent's Revenge. I forgot to tell you, Tam, said Captain Blackie, that von Zeidlitz is down. Doon, said Tam, Fritz Fokker, Doon. Queer laddie. He were a gay fictor, who strafed him. You did, he was the man you shot down yesterday. Tam's eyes were bright with excitement. You're foolin' me no, he asked eagerly. It wasna me that strafed him. Queer auld Fritz. It were a bonny un, a carafew, shot that got him. He wis above me, do ye ken? Ah nah, says I, ye'll no try that tailbutton trick on Tam, says I, nah, Fritz. An, I maneuvered to miss him. I put a drum into him at close range and, the queer feller side slipped and, nose dived. No was it Fritz, then. We want you to take a wreath over, he'll be buried at Ludezil. With the vera greatest pleasure, said Tam heartily, and if ye'll no mind, Captain, I'd like to compose a wee verse to pit in the box. For 2 hours Tam struggled heroically with his composition. At the end of that time he produced with awkward and unusual diffidence a poem written in his sprawling hand and addressed. Dedication to Mr. von Sidlitz by Tam of the Scoots. I'll read you the poem, Captain Blackie, Sir, said Tam nervously, and after much coughing he read. Aground and, Nubel Clud was the flyin' hero's shroud who dies at 7:30 and he vera well deserves the place that God reserves for the men who die in heaven. I've signed it, kind regards and, deepest sympathy his loved ains, said Tam. Didna say killit him, it would no be delicate. The wreath in a tin box, firmly corded and attached to a little parachute, was placed in the fuselage of a small moraine, his own machine being in the hands of the mechanics, and Tam climbed into the seat. In 5 minutes he was pushing up at the steep angle which represented the extreme angle at which a man can fly. Tam never employed a lesser one. He had learnt just what an aeroplane could do, and it was exactly all that he called for. Soon he was above the lines and was heading for Ludezil. Archies blazed and banged at him, leaving a trail of puff balls to mark his course. An enemy scout came out of the clouds to engage him and was avoided, for the Corps made it a point of honor not to fight when engaged on such a mission as was Tam's. Evidently the enemy scout realized the business of this lone British flyer and must have signaled his views to the earth, for the anti-aircraft batteries suddenly ceased fire, and when, approaching Ludezil, Tam sighted an enemy squadron engaged in a practice flight, they opened out and made way for him, offering no molestation. Tam began to plane down. He spotted the big white speckled cemetery and saw a little procession making its way to the grounds. He came down to 1,000 feet and dropped his parachute. He saw it open and sail earthward, and then someone on the ground waved a white handkerchief. "Guide," said Tam, and began to climb homeward. The next day something put out of action the engine of that redoubtable fighter, Baron von Hansen-Bassermann, and he planed down to the British aerodrome with his machine flaming. A dozen mechanics dashed into the blaze and hauled the German to safety, and, beyond a burnt hand and a singed mustache, he was unharmed. Lieutenant Baron von Hansen-Bassermann was a good-looking youth. He was, moreover, an undergraduate of Oxford University and his English was perfect. Hard luck, sir, said Blackie, and the Baron smiled. Fortunes of war. Where's Tam? He asked. Tam's upstairs somewhere, said Blackie. He looked up at the unflecked blue of the sky, shading his eyes. He's been gone 2 hours. The Baron nodded and smiled again. Then it was Tam, he said. I thought I knew his touch, does he, Luke, to express his satisfaction. That's Tam, said a chorus of voices. He was sitting in a damp cloud waiting for me, said the Baron ruefully. But who was the Frenchman with him? Blackie looked puzzled. Frenchman. There isn't a French machine within 50 miles, did he attack you, too? No, he just sat around watching and approving. I had the curious sense that I was being butchered to make a Frenchman's holiday. It is curious how one gets those quaint impressions in the air, it is a sort of ninth sense. I had a feeling that Tam was showing off, in fact, I knew it was Tam, for that reason. Come and have some breakfast before you're herded into captivity with the brutal soldiery, said Blackie, and they all went into the mess room together, and for an hour the room rang with laughter, for both the Baron and Captain Blackie were excellent raconteurs. Tam, when he returned, had little to say about his mysterious companion in the air. He thought it was a French laddie. Nor had he any story to tell about the driving down of the Baron's machine. He could only say that he, Kent, the Baron, had met his albatross before. He called him the Croon Prince, because the black crosses painted on his wings were of a more elaborate design than was usual. You might meet the Baron, Tam, said the wing commander. He's just off to the cage, and he wants to say, how d'ye do. Tam met the prisoner and shook hands with great solemnity. Who are ye, sirrah? He asked with admirable sang-froid. Seem to remember our face though hey no, met ye, only to shoot at, and, that spoils your chance o' gettin' acquainted wi, a body. I think we've met before, said the Baron with a grim little smile. Oh, before I forget, we very much appreciated your poem, Tam, there are lines in it which were quite beautiful. Tam flushed crimson with pleasure. Thank ye, sirrah, he blurted. Ye couldna, made me more pleased, even if killit ye. The Baron threw back his head and laughed. Goodbye, Tam, take care of yourself. There's a new man come to us who will give you some trouble. It's no, Mr. Mac Muller? Asked Tam eagerly. Oh, you've heard of Captain Muller? Asked the prisoner interestedly. Heard, good lord, mon, sirrah, mean, look here. He put his hand in his pocket and produced a worn leather case. From this he extracted 2 or 3 newspaper cuttings and selected one, headed, German official. Captain Muller, read Tam, yesterday shot down his 26th aeroplane. That's Muller, said the other carefully. I can tell you no more, except look after yourself. Hi na doot about that, sirrah, said Tam with confidence. He went up that afternoon in accordance with instructions received from headquarters to search enemy territory west of a line from Montessier to Saint Pierre le Petit. He made his search, and sailed down with his report as the sun reached the horizon. A very quiet journey, he complained, was hoppin' for a squint at Mr. Mac Muller, but he was sleeping like a dormouse, heard his snore risen to heaven and, ma heart was sick wi, disappointed longin'. Who long, says, who long will ye avoid the doom Tam o' the scoots has marked ye doon for? There was na reply. I've discovered Tam's weird pal, said Blackie, coming into the mess before lunch the next day. He is Claude Beaumont of the American squadron. Lefebvre, the wing commander, was up today. Apparently Beaumont is an exceedingly rich young man who has equipped a wing with its own machines, hangars and repair shop, and he flies where he likes. Look at him. They crowded out with whatever glasses they could lay their hands upon and watched the 2 tiny machines that circled and dipped, climbed and banked about one another. First one would dart away with the other in pursuit, then the chaser, as though despairing of overtaking his quarry, would turn back. The hare would then turn and chase the other. Have you ever seen 2 puppies at play? Asked Blackie. Look at Tam chasing his tail, and neither man knows the other or has ever looked upon his face. Isn't it weird? That's von Hansen-Bassermann's 9th sense. They can't speak, they can't even see one another properly, and yet they're good pals. Look at 'em. I've watched the puppies of the pack go on in exactly the same way. What is Tam supposed to be doing? He's watching the spotters. Tam will be down presently and we'll ask David how he came to meet Jonathan. This business has been going on for weeks. Tam had received the recall signal. Beneath him he saw the two spotters returning home, and he waved his hand to his sporting companion and came round in a little more than twice his own length. He saw his strange friend's hand raised in acknowledgement, and watched him turn for the south. Tam drove on for a mile, then something made him look back. Above his friend was a glittering white dragonfly, and as he looked the fly darted down at the American tail. "Missed him," said Tam, and swung round. He was racing with the wind at top speed and he must have been doing 120 miles an hour, but for the fact that he was climbing at the extreme angle. He saw the dragonfly loop and climb and the American swing about to attack. But his machine was too slow, that Tam knew. Nothing short of a miracle could save the lower machine, for the enemy had again reached the higher position. So engrossed was he with his plan that he did not see Tam until the Scot was driving blindly to meet him, until the first shower from Tam's Lewis gun rained on wing and fuselage. The German swerved in his drive and missed his proper prey. Tam was behind him and above him, but in no position to attack. He could, and did fire a drum into the fleeing foeman, but none of the shots took effect. "Tarn him, Archie," groaned Tam, and as though the earth gunners had heard his plea, a screen of bursting shrapnel rose before the dragonfly. He turned and nose-dived with Tam behind him, but now his nose was for home, and Tam, after a 5-mile pursuit, came round and made for home also. Near his own lines he came up with the circling Frenchman, and received his thanks, 4 fingers extended in the air, before the signaller, taking a route within the lines, streaked for home. "Phew," said Tam, shaking his head. "Who were you chasing?" asked Blackie. "He can go. Jans Mac Muller," said Tam, jerking his thumb at the eastern sky. "He's a vera likeable feller, but a wee bit too canny and a big bit too fast. Captain Blackie, Sir, can ye no get me a machine that can flee? Ma wee machine is no, unlike a hare's, but wishfu, o providin the corpse." "You've got the fastest machine in France, Tam," said the captain. Tam nodded. "It's vera likely, she wis no, runnin' so sweet," he confessed. "But, mon, that Muller, he's a bra hoon and encouraged by the fine things that the Baron said aboot ma poetry. Eck, I've got a ground verse in ma hide for Mr. Muller's berryin. Hae ye a seagar aboot ye, Captain Blackie?" Gave ma case to the Duke of Argyll and he has no, returned it. Chapter 3. The Coming of Muller. There arrived one day at the aerodrome a large packing case addressed, Sergeant Tam. There was no surname, though there was no excuse for the timidity which stopped short at Tam. The consigner might, at least, have ventured to add a tentative and inquiring Mac. Tam took the case into his little bunk, and opened it. The stripping of the rough outer packing revealed a suave, unpolished cedar cabinet with 2 doors and a key that dangled from one of the knobs. Tam opened the case after some consideration and disclosed shelf upon shelf tightly packed with bundles of rich, brown, fragrant cigars. There was a card inscribed, "Your friend in the Merman Pusher." "Who," demanded Tam, "is ma low acquaintance, who disports himself in an Udo date machine?" Young Carter, who had come in to inspect the unpacking, offered a suggestion. "Probably the French machine that is always coming over here to see you," he said, "Mr. Thigamy tight, the American." "Ah, to be sure," said Tam relieved. Thought maybe the Kaiser had sent me drooged seagars, an awfu, thorn in the puir laddie's side." "Ye may laugh, Mr. Carter, but recca, a case we're a bonny detective wi, the same name as Yesel, though doot if he was related to ye, was foiled by the machinations o' Ferdy the Forger at the moment o' his triumph by the lad gieing him a seagar soaked in laudanum and chloroform." He took a bundle, slipped out 2 cigars, offered one to his officer, after a brief but baffling examination to discover which was the worse, and lit the other. "They're no, so bad," he admitted, "but your ain seagars never taste so bonny as the seagars ye're Frian's loan ye." They came in time, said Carter. We'd started a league for the suppression of cigar cadging. Maybe ye thocht o' makin' me treasurer. Nah. A wee seagar is no muckle to gie a body was brocht fame and honor to the wing. I often wonder, Tam, said Carter, how much you're joking and laughing at yourself when you're talking about, Tam, the terror of the clouds, and how much you're in earnest. A fleeting smile flickered for a second about Tam's mouth and vanished. In all guide works of reference, fra Aldmore's Almanac to the Clyde River timetable, he said soberly, it's written that a Scotsman canna joke. If I'd no talk about Tam, would ye talk aboot yesels? Nah. Ye'd go oop and, doon, fictanen, dean wiut a word. If ye'll talk aboot yesels I'll no talk aboot Tam. Na ma duty, Mr. Carter, I'm the official boaster o' the wingen, the corps, and, when they bring me doon wi, a bullet in ma hide, hope ye'll engage another like me. There isn't another like you, Tam, laughed Carter. Ye dinna na Glasgow, replied Tam darkly. Lieutenant Carter went up on a tour of duty soon after, and Tam was on the ground to watch his departure. Tam, he shouted, before the controls were in, I like that cigar, I'll take 50 from you tonight. Ower ma dade body, said Tam, puffing contentedly at the very last inch of his own. The watchwords o' victory are 3ft and economy. I've warned you, roared Carter, for now the engine was going. Tam nodded a smiling farewell as the machine skipped and ran over the ground before it swooped upward into space. He went back to his room, but had hardly settled himself to the examination of a new batch of blood-curdling literature before Blackie strode in. Mr. Carter's down, Tam, he said. Doon. Tam jumped up, a frown on his face. Shot dead and fell inside our lines, go up and see if you can find Muller. Tam dressed slowly. Behind the mask of his face, God knows what sorrow lay, for he was fond of the boy, as he had been fond of so many boys who had gone up in the joy and pride of their youth, and had earned by the supreme sacrifice that sinister line in the communiques, one of our machines did not return. He ranged the heavens that day seeking his man. He waited temptingly in reachable places and even lured one of his enemies to attack him. There's something down, said Blackie, as a flaming German aeroplane shot downward from the clouds. But I'm afraid it's not Muller this time. It was not. Tam returned morose and uncommunicative. His anger was increased when the intercepted wireless came to hand in the evening. Captain Muller shot down his 27th aeroplane. That night, when the mess was sitting around after dinner, Tam appeared with a big armful of cigars. What's the matter with 'em? Asked Blackie in mock alarm. They're that Mr. Carter balked, said Tam untruthfully, and, thought ye'd wish to hie a few o' the laddies' cigars. Nobody was deceived. They pulled the cigars for the mess and Tam went back to his quarters lighter of heart. He slept soundly and was wakened an hour before dawn by his batman. The weary round, the daily task, quoted Tam, taking the steaming mug of tea from his servant's hands. What likes the mornin', Horace? Fine, Sergeant, clear sky and all the stars are out. Fine for them, said Tam sarcastically, they've nothin' to do but be out or in, I've no patience wi, the stars, queer silly bodies winkin' and blinkin' and, doin' nae guide to mon or beastie, chuck me ma breeches and let the warm water rin in the bath. In the grey light of dawn the reliefs stood on the ground, waiting for the word, go. Wonder what ma Fryan, Mac Muller is thinkin' the morn. Asked Tam, a wan face and a haggard een, he'll be talkin' a mournfu, farewell o' the Croon Prince Ruprecht. You're a brave lad, says the Croon Prince, but maybe Tam's awa. Nah, says Mac Muller, shakin' his hide, I've a presentiment that Tam's no, awa. He'll be oopstairs waitin' to deal his feelin's blow. Eck. Says Mr. Mac Muller, for why did I leave ma fine job at the gas works to encounter the perils and adver cities of aerial reconnaissance? He says, well, I'll be gettin' alang, your majesty or highness, don't expect ma till ye see ma. He moons his grained machine and, soon the intrepid baird man is soarin' to the skies. He looks oop, what is that sinister for lurking in the clouds? It is Tam the Comet. Up, you talkative devil, said Blackie pleasantly. Tam rode upward at an angle which sent so great a pressure of air against him that he ached in back and arm and legs to keep his balance. It was as though he were leaning back without support, with great weights piled on his chest. He saw nothing but the pale blue skies and the fleecy trail of high clouds, heard nothing but the numbing, maddening roar of his engines. He sang a little song to himself, for despite his discomfort he was happy enough. His eyes were for the engine, his ears for possible eccentricities of running. He was pushing a straight course and knew exactly where he was by a glance at his barometer. At 6,000 feet he was behind the British lines at the Bois de Colbert, at 7,000 feet he should be over Nivelle Anchor and should turn so that he reached his proper altitude at a point 1 mile behind the fire trenches and somewhere in the region of the Bois de Colbert again. The aeronometer marked 12,000 feet when he leveled the machine and began to take an interest in military affairs. The sky was clear of machines, with the exception of honest British spotters lumbering along like farm laborers to their monotonous toil. A gentlemanly fighting machine was doing stunts over by Serre and there was no sign of an enemy. Tam looked down. He saw a world of tiny squares intersected by thin white lines. These were main roads. He saw little dewdrops of water occurring at irregular intervals. They were really respectable-sized lakes. Beneath him were 2 irregular scratches against the dull green-brown of earth that stretched interminably north and south. They ran parallel at irregular distances apart. Sometimes they approached so that it seemed that they touched. In other places they drew apart from one another for no apparent reason and there was quite a respectable distance of ground between them. These were the trench lines, and every now and again on one side or the other a puff of dirty brown smoke would appear and hang like a pall before the breeze sent it streaming slowly backward. Sometimes the clouds of smoke would be almost continuous, but these shell bursts were not confined to the front lines. From where Tam hung he could see billowing smoke clouds appear in every direction. Far behind the enemy's lines at the great road junctions, in the low-roofed billeting villages, on the single-track railways, they came and went. The thunder of his engines drowned all sound so he could not hear the never-ceasing booming of the guns, the never-ending crash of exploding shell. Once he saw a heavy German shell in the air. He glimpsed it at that culminating point of its trajectory where the shell begins to lose its initial velocity and turns earthward again. It was a curious experience, which many airmen have had, and quite understandable, since the howitzer shell rises to a tremendous height before it follows the descending curve of its flight. He paid a visit to the only cloud that had any pretensions to being a cloud, and found nothing. So he went over the German lines. He passed far behind the fighting front and presently came above a certain confusion of ground which marked an advance depot. He pressed his foot twice on a lever and circled. Looking down he saw 2 red bursts of flame and a mass of smoke. He did not hear the explosions of the bombs he had loosed, because it was impossible to hear anything but the angry roar of his engines. A belligerent is very sensitive over the matter of bomb depots, and Tam, turning homeward, looked for the machines which would assuredly rise to intercept him. Already the Archies were banging away at him, and a fragment of shell had actually struck his fuselage. But he was not bothering about Archies. He did swerve toward a battery skillfully hidden behind a hayrick and dropped 2 hopeful bombs, but he scarcely troubled to make an inspection of the result. Then before him appeared his enemy. Tam had the sun at his back and secured a good view of the Muller machine. It was the great white dragon fly he had seen 2 days before. Apparently Muller had other business on hand. He was passing across Tam's course diagonally, and he was climbing. Tam grinned. He was also pushing upward, for he knew that his enemy, seemingly oblivious to his presence, had sighted him and was getting into position to attack. Tam's engine was running beautifully. He could feel a subtle resolution in the pull of it. It almost seemed that this thing of steel was possessed of a soul all its own. He was keeping level with the enemy, on a parallel course which enabled him to keep his eye upon the redoubtable fighter. Then, without warning, the German banked over and headed straight for Tam, his machine gun stuttering. Tam turned to meet him. They were less than half a mile from each other and were drawing together at the rate of 200 miles an hour. There were, therefore, just 10 seconds separating them. What maneuver Muller intended is not clear. He knew, and then he realized in a flash what Tam was after. Round he went, rocking like a ship at sea. A bullet struck his wheel and sent the smashed wood flying. He nose-dived for his own lines and Tam glared down after him. Muller reached his aerodrome and was laughing quietly when he descended. "I met Tam," he said to his chief. "He tried to ram me at 16,000 feet, oh, yes. I came down, but, ich habe das nicht gewollt. I did not will it." Tam returned to his headquarters full of schemes and bright thoughts. "You drove him down," said the delighted Blackie. "Why, Tam, it's fine. Muller never goes down, you've broken one of his traditions." Wished it was ane of his hides," said Tam. Thought for about 3 seconds he was accepting the challenge o' the Glasgow. Ganymede, no, so sure o' Ganymede, got him out of the circulatin' library and, he was very dull except the bit where he went oop in the air on the back of an eagle and, dropped his hustle. But Mac Muller wasn't so full o' ficht as that. He walked away, but stopped and came back. "A wee kirker," he said. Remembered it when met Mac Muller. "Though no particular who buried, entitled to a wee kirk meenister. Mony's the time I've put a penny the collection. It sair grieve at me to waste guide money, but me auld mither watch at me like a cat, and 'twere as much as my life was worth to pit it in ma breeches pocket." Tam spent the flying hours of the next day looking for his enemy, but without result. The next day he again drew blank, and on the third day took part in an organized raid upon enemy communications, fighting his way back from the interior of Belgium single-handed, for he had allowed himself to be rounded out, and had to dispose of 2 enemy machines before he could go in pursuit of the bombing squadrons. In consequence, he had to meet and reject the attentions of every ruffled enemy that the bombers and their bullies had fought in passing. At 5 o'clock in the evening he dropped from the heavens in one straight plummet dive which brought him 3 miles in a little under 1 minute. "Did you meet Muller?" asked Captain Blackie. "He's about, he shot down Mr. Gray this morning whilst you were away." "Mr. Gray? Weel," said Tam, shaking, "queer soul, he was a very guide gentleman, wit, a gay young hairt." "I hope Tam will pronounce my epitaph," said Blackie to Bolt, the observer. "He doesn't know how to think unkindly of his pals." "Tam will get Muller," said Bolt. "I saw the scrap the other day. Tam was prepared to kill himself if he could bring him down. He was out for a collision, I'll swear, and Muller knew it and lost his nerve for the fight. That means that Muller is hating himself and will go running for Tam at the first opportunity. Tam shall have his chance. The new B.I.6 is ready and Tam shall have it. Now every airman knows the character of the old B.I.5. She was a fast machine, could rise quicker than any other aeroplane in the world. She could do things which no other machine could do, and could also behave as no self-respecting aeroplane would wish to behave. For example, she was an involuntary looper. For no apparent reason at all she would suddenly buck like a lunatic Mustang. In these frenzies she would answer no appliance and obey no other mechanical law than the law of gravitation. Tam had tried B.I.5 and had lived to tell the story. There is a legend that he reached Earth flying backward and upside down, but that is probably without foundation. Then an ingenious American had taken B.I.5 in hand and had done certain things to her wings, her tail, her fuselage and her engine, and from the chaos of her remains was born B.I.6, not unlike her erratic mother in appearance, but viceless. Tam learned of his opportunity without any display of enthusiasm. Doot she's na guide," he said. "Captain Blackie, Sir, I've got ma ain idea what B.I. stands for. It's no complimentary to the inventor. If Sax is better, then I'm goin' to believe in an old sayin'." "What is that, Tam?" "Fear safety in numbers," said Tam, and, the while on the subject of literature I'd like your opinion on a verse made about Mr. Mac Muller. He produced a folded sheet of paper, opened it, and read. "Amidst the silence of the stars he fell, yon duty man o' Mars. The angels laugh at to see this gallant baird man die. At el erst. The angels cry, we vain who'll teach us who to fly, thanks be, he's strafed. Fine, said Blackie with a smile, but suppose you're strafed instead. Hit the wee poem on ma ain wreath, said Tam simply, it'll be true. Chapter IVTHE Strafing of Muller. On the earth, rain was falling from grey and gloomy clouds. Above those clouds the sun shone down from a blue sky upon a billowing mass that bore a resemblance to the uneven surface of a limitless plain of lather. High, but not too high above cloud level, a big white albatross circled serenely, its long, untidy wireless aerial dangling. The man in the machine with receivers to his ears listened intently for the faint HD, which was his official number. Messages he caught, mostly in English, for he was above the British lines. 9-4. 9-4. 9-4, called somebody insistently. That was a spotter, signaling a correction of range, then. Stop where you are. KLBQ. Bad light. Signal to XO73 last shot. Repeat your signal. No. Bad light. Sorry, bad light. Stay where you are. He guessed some could not follow others. The letter groups were, of course, code messages indicating the distance shells were bursting from their targets. The apologies were easily explained, for the light was very bad indeed. Tam. Muller. Above. L. The man in the machine tried the lock of his gun and began to get interested. Now his eyes were fixed upon the rolling, iridescent cloud mass below. From what point would the fighting machine emerge? He climbed up a little higher to be on the safe side. Then, from a valley of mist half a mile away, a tiny machine shot up, shining like burnished silver in the rays of the afternoon sun, for Tam had driven up in a drizzle of rain, and wings and fuselage were soaking wet. The watcher above rushed to the attack. He was perhaps 1,000 yards above his enemy and had certain advantages, a fact which Tam realized. He ceased to climb, flattened and went skimming along the top of the cloud, darting here and there with seeming aimlessness. His pursuer rapidly reviewed the situation. To dive down upon his prey would mean that in the event of missing his erratic moving foe, the attacker would plunge into the cloud fog and be at a disadvantage. At the same time, he would risk it. Suddenly up went his tail. But Tam had vanished in the mist, for as he saw the tail go up, he had followed suit, and nothing in the world dives like a bee. 6. No sooner was he out of sight of his attacker than he brought the nose of the machine up again and began a lightning climb to sunshine. He was the first to reach open country, and he looked round for Muller. That redoubtable fighter reappeared in front and below him, and Tam dived for him. Muller's nose went down and back to his hiding place he dived. Tam corrected his level and swooped upward again. There was no sign of Captain Muller. Tam cruised up and down, searching the cloud for his enemy. He was doing three things at once. He was looking, he was fitting another drum to his gun, and he was controlling the flight of his machine, when, CHK, said the wireless, and Tam listened, screwing his face into a grimace signifying at once the difficulty of hearing, and his apprehension that he might lose a word of what was to follow. LQ, said the receiver. No, said Tam in perplexity, is LQ, meanin' that a ought to rin for my life, or is it, continue the guide work? Arguing that his work was invisible from the earth and that a more urgent interpretation was to be put upon the message, he turned westward and dived, not, however, before he had seen over his shoulder a dozen enemy machines come flashing up from the clouds. Haired cheese, said Tam, the old cat's a bootin', the wee moosie's awa. He had intended going home, but a new and bright thought struck him. He turned his machine and pushed straight through the cloud the way he had come. He knew they had seen him disappearing and, airman-like, they would remain a while to bask in the sunlight and dry off. As a general rule, Tam hated clouds. You could not tell whether you were flying right side up or upside down, and he had always a curious sense of nervousness that he would collide with something. Yet, for once, he drove through the swirling smoke with a sense of joyous anticipation, and presently began to rise gently, keeping his eyes aloft to detect the first thinning of the fog. Presently he saw the sunlight reflected on the upper stratas and began to climb steeply. His machine ripped out into the sun, a fierce, roaring little fury. Not 100 yards away was a fighting machine. Ticka, 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 tick, said Tam's machine gun. Tam's staring blue eyes were on the sights, he could not miss. The pilot went limp in his seat, the observer took his hand from his gun to grip the controls. Too late, the wide-winged fighter skidded like a motorbus on a greasy road and fell into the clouds sideways. But now the enemy was coming at him from all points of the compass. Dinna let or pertin grieve ye, sang Tam and dropped straight through the clouds into the rain and a dim view of a bedraggled earth. There's Burley, said Blackie, clad in a long oilskin and a sou'wester as he checked off the homecoming adventurers. Do you ever notice how his machine always looks lopsided? There's Galbraith and Mosen, who's that fellow on the moraine? Oh, yes, that's Parker Smith. H.M. What's wrong? Where's Tam? I hope those beggars didn't catch him. There he is, the devil. Tam was doing stunts. He was side-slipping, nose-diving and looping. He was, in fine, setting up all those stresses which a machine under extraordinary circumstances might have to endure. He always does that with a new machine, sir, said Captain Blackie's companion. I've never understood why, because if he found a weak place, he'd be too dead for the information to be of any service to him. Later, when Tam condescended to bring himself to earth, Blackie asked him, "Why do you do fool stunts, Tam? The place to test the machine is on the ground." "You're wrong, Sir R," said Tam quietly, "the ground's a fine place to test a wee perambulator or a motor car or a pair of buots, but it's no, the place to test an aeroplane. The aeroplane and the submarine maun be tried out in their native elements. But suppose you did succeed in breaking something, and you went to glory." "Aye," said Tam quietly, "and suppose I'm goin' oop wi, matchless courage to save ma friends frae the ravishin' Hunan, ma machine plays hooky. Would it no be worse for a concairned than if a smash oop by messel? Did you see Muller in the clouds? Left him holdin' a committee meetin', Captain Mac Muller in the cheer. Resolve it, says the chairman, that this meetin', duly and truly assembled, passes a hearty vote o' thanks to Tam o' the Scoots, the magician o' the air, for the grand fight he made against a superior enemy, carried. Resolve it, says the chairman, that we'll no ony more risk, but confine our attentions to strafe and spotters. Carried wi, acclamation. The meeting then adjourned to inquire after machine number 8, 2, strafed in the execution of ma duty. It seemed almost as though Tam's words were prophetic, for the next day Smith and Curzon were attacked whilst spotting for the heavies, and fell in flames in no man's land. They got Smith in during the night and rushed him back to a base hospital, but Curzon was dead before the machine reached the ground. The same morning Tam read in the German official. In the course of the day Captain Muller shot down his 30th enemy aeroplane, which fell before the English lines. It were no, the English lines, but the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders lines, complained Tam. 30 machines Jan Muller ha, strafed. Wheel. He went to his room very thoughtful, and the day following, being an off day, he spent between the machine shop and the hangar where the B.I.6 reposed. It must never be forgotten that Tam was a born mechanician. To him the machine had a body, a soul, a voice, and a temperament. Noises which engines made had a peculiar significance to Tam. He not only could tell you how they were behaving, but how they would be likely to behave after 2 hours running. He knew all the symptoms of their mysterious diseases and he was versed in their dietary. He fed his own engines, explored his own tanks, greased and cleaned with his own hands every delicate part of the frail machinery. There was neither strut nor stay, bolt nor screw, that he did not know or had not studied, tested or replaced. He cleaned his own gun and examined, leather duster in hand, every round of ammunition he took up. He left little to chance and never went out to attack but with a plan, an alternative plan and an open mind. And now since Muller must be settled with, Tam was more than careful. The difficulty about aeroplanes is that they look very much like one another. Tam fought indecisively 3 big white albatross machines before a Fokker Hawk darted down from the shelter of a cloud wraith and revealed itself as the temporary preoccupation of Captain Muller. The encounter may be told in Tam's own words. The ruthless pursuit of his duty. Tam was patrolling at a height o' 12,000 feet, his mind filled beautiful, thoughts aboot payday, when a cold shiver passes doon the dauntless spine o' the wee hero. 'Tis a premonition or warnin' o' peril. He spears open, doon absent-mindedly fingerin' the mechanism of his silver-plated Lewis gun. There was nothing in sicht, nothing to mar the glories of the morn. "Canna be mistaken?" asks Tam. "No. 1,000 times no." And, these few words, he began his perilous climb. Merciful heavens! What's yon? 'Tis the mad Muller. Swift as the eagle faying upon his prey, faws Mac Muller, a licht o' joy in his een, his bullets twangin' like hair-pea strings. But Tam the Tempest is no bothered. Cal lm and amos majestic in his sang-froid, a French expression, he leaps gaily to the fray, and here I am. "But, Tam," protested Galbraith, "that's a rotten story. What happened after the lep? Did you get up to him?" Didna lep oop," said Tam gravely, lep doon, it wis no, the time to ficht, it wis the time to flee, and, I'm a fleein' mon." That he would deliberately shrink an issue with his enemy was unthinkable. And yet he rather avoided than sought Muller after this encounter. One afternoon he came to Galbraith's quarters. Galbraith was rich and young and a great sportsman. "Canna hie a word ye?" asked Tam mysteriously. "Surely," said the boy. "Come in, you want a cigar, Tam?" he accused. "Get awa, ahint me, Satan," said Tam piously. "Avgin oop cajun cigars and, beg ye no, tae tempit a puir weak body. Just pui the box doon where can reach it and, mebbe ale help messel, be sint-minded. Came, mon, this is a bonny smock. Ye mon pay an awfu, lot for these. 'Twa shillins each. Ek. It's sinfu, so many puir souls in need, ale talk, a few me wenna, go, to distribute to the sufferin' mechanics. Nah, it is na for cigars am beggin', na this time, but hie ye an old suit o' clays ye'll no be wantin'." "A suit? Good Lord, yes, Tam," said Galbraith, jumping down from the table on which he was seated. "Do you want it for yourself?" "Well," replied Tam cautiously, doon, it's for Ma Fryan, Fitzroy McGinty, the celebrated Mac Muller murderer." Galbraith looked at him with laughter in his eyes. "Fitzroy McGinty? And who the devil is Fitzroy McGinty?" Tam cleared his throat. "Ma Fryan, Fitzroy McGinty is, like Tam, an ornament o' the Royal Fleein' Corps. Our hero was burr'n in affluent circumstances, his faither bein' the Laird o' Maclassity, his mither a Fitzroy o' Sussex. Fitz McGinty lived ground castle though sans o' servants to wait on him, and he ate his parich a demon spune. Seemed Rossi for the wee boy, but yin day, accused o' the murder o' the butler and the burglary of his brither's trucers, he rin frae hame, crossin' to Ameriky, where he foon, employment a rancher as coo boy. Whilst there, his naturally adventurous spirit brought him into contact Alkali Pete the road agent, ye ken the feller that holds oop the Deadville stage." "Oh, I ken him all right," said the patient Galbraith, "but, honestly, Tam, who is your friend?" "Ma Fryan, Angus McCarthy. You said Fitzroy McGinty just now." "Oh, aye," said Tam hastily, "'twas ane of his assumed names." "You're a humbug, but here's the kit. Is that of use?" "Aye." Tam gathered the garments under his arm and took a solemn farewell. "Ye'll be meetin' Rabba again, means Angus, mister. Galbraith, but I'd be glad if ye'd no mention to him that he's wearin' yer clays." He went to a distant store and for the rest of the day, with the assistance of a mechanic, he was busy creating the newest recruit to the Royal Flying Corps. Tam was thorough and inventive. He must not only stuff the old suit with wood shavings and straw, but he must unstuff it again, so that he might thread a coil of pliable wire to give the figure the necessary stiffness. "Ye maun hae a backbone if you're to be an observer, ma manny," said Tam, "and, no for yer bonny face, Horace, will ye pass me the plaister o' Paris and, algi, ye an imitation o' Michael Angelo, the celebrated face-maker." His work was interluded with comments on men and affairs. The very nature of his task brought into play that sense of humor and that stimulation of fancy to which he responded with such readiness. Doot wither ale gay ye a moustache, said Tam, surveying his handiwork. It's no necessary to a fleein' mon, but it's awfu, temptin' to an artist. He scratched his head thoughtfully. Ye should be more tanned, Angus, he said, and took up the varnish brush. At last the great work was finished. The dummy was lifelike even outside of the setting which Tam had planned. From the cap fastened to the plaster head by tacks to the gloved hands, the figure was all that an officer of the R.F.C. might be, supposing he were pigeon-toed and limp of leg. The next morning Tam called on Blackie in his office and asked to be allowed to take certain liberties with his machine, a permission which, when it was explained, was readily granted. He went up in the afternoon and headed straight for the enemy's lines. He was flying at a considerable height, and Captain Muller, who had been on a joy ride to another sector of the line and had descended to his aerodrome, was informed that a very high-flying spotter was treating Archie fire with contempt and had, moreover, dropped random bombs which, by the greatest luck in the world, had blown up a munition reserve. "I'll go up and scare him off," said Captain Muller. He focused a telescope upon the tiny spotter. "It looks more like a fast scout than a spotter," he said, "yet there are obviously 2 men in her." He went up in a steep climb, his powerful engines roaring savagely. It took him longer to reach his altitude than he had anticipated. He was still below the alleged spotter with its straw-stuffed observer when Tam dived for him. All that the nursing of a highly trained mechanic could give to an engine, all of precision that a cold blue eye and a steady hand could lend to a machine gun, all that an unfearing heart could throw into that one wild, superlative fling, Tam gave. The engine pulled to its last ounce, the wings and stays held to the ultimate stress. "Tam," said Muller to himself and smiled, for he knew that death had come. He fired upward and banked over, then he waved his hand in blind salute, though he had a bullet in his heart and was one with the nothingness about him. Tam swung round and stared fiercely as Muller's machine fell. He saw it strike the earth, crumple and smoke. "Almighty God," said the lips of Tam, "look after that yin. He wis a bonny fictor and had a gay hairt, and he nos richt weel had no malice agin him, amen." Chapter V. Annie, the gun. "I've noticed," said Tam, "a disposition in written classes to omit the necessary bits of scenery that throw up the odious villainy of the factor, or the lonely vertu of the mill girl. A forest maiden wi'out the forest or a hard-workin' factory lass wi'out a chimney stock, is no more convincin' than a seagar band wi'out the seagar, or an empty pay envelope." "Why this disquisition on the arts, Tam?" asked Captain Blackie testily. 3 o'clock in the morning, and freezing at that, a dark aerodrome and the ceaseless drum of guns, neither the time, the place nor the ideal accompaniment to philosophy, you might think. Blackie was as nervous as a squadron commander may well be who has sent a party on a midnight stunt, and finds 3 o'clock marked on the phosphorescent dial of his watch and not so much as a single machine in sight. "Literature," said Tam easily, "is a science or a disease very much like airmanship. 'Tis all notes of exclamation and question marks, with one full stop and several semi-comatose crashes." "Oh, for heaven's sake, shut up, Tam," said Blackie savagely. "Haven't you a cigar to fill that gap in your face?" "Aye," said Tam calmly, "did ye know, smell it. It's one o' young Master Taunton's lubricatos and I'm smokin' it for an endurance test. They're no so bad, remembering the inexperience and youth o' Maui fryin'." Blackie turned. "Tam," he said shortly, "I'm just worried sick about those fellows and I wish—" "Oh, them," said Tam in an extravagant tone of surprise, "they're comin' back, Captain Blackie, sirrah, 5, one with an engine that's runnin' no, so sweet, that'll be Mr. Gordon's, I'm thinkin'." Captain Blackie turned to the other incredulously. "You can hear them?" he asked. "I hear nothing. It's the smell of Master Taunton's seagar in your ears," said Tam. "For the past 5 minutes I've been listenin' to the gay music of their tractors, bummin' like the mill hooter on a foggy morn. There they are." High in the dark heavens a tiny speck of red light glowed, lingered a moment and vanished. Then another, then a green that faded to white. Thank the Lord, breathed Blackie. Light up. There's time, said Tam. Yon, buses are 15,000 up. They came roaring and stuttering to earth, 5 monstrous shapes, and passed to the hands of their mechanics. Tam heard you, said Blackie to the young leader, stripping his gloves thoughtfully by the side of his machine. Who had the engine trouble? Gordon, chuckled the youth. That bus is a... Heck, sir, said Tam and put his hands to his ears. They had walked across to the commander's office. Well, what luck had you? Asked Blackie. Lieutenant Taunton made a very wry face. I rather fancy we got the aerodrome. We saw something burning beautifully as we turned for home, but Fritz has a new searchlight installation and something fierce in the way of Archies. There's a new battery and unless I'm mistaken a new kind of gun, that's why we climbed. They angled the lights and got our range in 2 calendar seconds and they never left us alone. There was Onegin in particular that was almost undodgeable. I stalled and side-slipped, climbed and nose-dived, but the devil was always on the spot. Said Blackie thoughtfully, did you mark the new battery? XB84 as far as I could judge, said the other and indicated a tiny square on the big map which covered the side of the office. It wasn't worthwhile locating, for I fancy that my particular friend was mobile. Tam, look out for the demon gunner of Bochevel. It is computed by state, by fellers that couldn't, said Tam, that it takes 7,000 shells to hit a flyin' man. By my own elaborate system of calculation, reckon that I've 5,000 shells to see before get the one that's marked WI, ma name and address. And he summarily dismissed the matter from his mind for the night. 48 hours later he found the question of AA gunnery a problem which was not susceptible to such cavalier treatment. He came back to the aerodrome this afternoon, shooting down from a great height in one steep run, and found the whole of the squadron waiting for him. Tam descended from the fuselage very solemnly, affecting not to notice the waiting audience, and with a little salute, which was half a friendly nod, he would have made his way to squadron headquarters had not Blackie hailed him. Come on, Tam, he smiled. Why this modesty? Sir, said Tam with well-simulated surprise. Let us hear about the gun. Ah, the gun, said Tam as though it were some small matter which he had overlooked in the greater business of the day. Well, now, Sir, that is some gun, and after I've had a sup I'll tell you the story of my reckless exploits. He walked slowly over to his mess, followed by the badinage of his superiors. You saw it, Austin, didn't you? Blackie turned to the young airman. Oh, yes, sir. I was spotting for a howitzer battery and they were firing like a gas pipe. By the way, right outside the clock, I can't make up my mind what is the matter with that battery. Never mind about the battery, interrupted Blackie, tell us about Tam. I didn't see it all, said Austin, and I didn't know it was Tam until later. The first thing I saw was one of our fellows, zooming, up at a rare battle on his lonely. I didn't take much notice of that. I thought it was one of our fellows on a stunt. But presently I could see Archie getting in his grand work. It was a battery somewhere on the Lille road, and it was a scorcher, for it got his level first pop. Instead of going on, the bus started circling as though he was enjoying the shrap bath. As far as I could see there were 4 guns on him, but 3 of them were wild and late. You could see their bursts over him and under him, but the 4th was a terror. It just potted away, always at his level. If he went up it lived with him, if he dropped it was alongside of him. It was quaint to see the other guns correcting their range, but always a bit after the fair. Of course, I knew it was Tam and I somehow knew he was just circling round trying out the new gun. How he escaped, the Lord knows. Faithful to his promise, Tam returned. If any of you gentlemen have a cigar, he asked. 6 were offered to him and he took them all. I'll no offend any o ye, he explained, by refusing your hospitality. They mayn't be good cigars, as I've reason to know, but I'll smoke them all in the spirit they are given. He sat down on a big packing case, tucked up his legs under him and pulled silently at the glowing perfecto. Then he began. At 11 o'clock in the forenoon, said Tam, settling himself to the agreeable task, in or about the vicinity of Labaugh a solitary airman might talk, been sighted or viewed, winging his way leisurely across the fleckless blue o' the skies. Had ye been near enough ye would have observed a smile that played around his gay young face. In his blue eyes was a look o' deep thought. Was he thinkin' of home, of his humble cot in the shadow of Ben Lomond? He was not, for he never had a home in the shadow of Ben Lomond. Was he thinkin' sadly of the meanness o' his superior officer who had left one common seagar in his box and had said, "Tam, go into my quarters and help yourself to the smokes"? "Tam, I left 20, said an indignant voice, "and when I came to look for them they were all gone." "I've no doot there's a bad character amongst ye," said Tam gravely, only found 3, and 2 of 'em were bad, or it may have been 4. No, Sir R.S., he was no, thinkin' of earthly things. Suddenly as he zoomed to the heavens there was a loud crack, and looking over, the young hero discovered that life was indeed a bed of shrapnel and that more was on its way, for at every point of the compass Archie was belching forth death and destruction. He paused and rubbed his chin. Archie didn't mind, he said with a little chuckle, but Archie's little sister, Sir R, she was fierce. She never left me. Stalled and, looped, stood on ma head and sat on ma tail. Banked to the left and to the right. Spiraled up in nose-dived dune, and she stayed me closer than a sister. For whores, it seemed almost an eternity. Tam o' the Scoots hovered with impunity above the inferno. "But why, Tam?" asked Blackie. "Was it sheer swank on your part?" "It was no swank," said Tam quietly. "Listen, Captain Blackie, Sir R, 4 guns were bangin' at me, and one of them was a good one, too good to live. Suppose A had spotted that one, could have dropped and bombed him." Blackie was frowning. "I think we'll leave the Archies alone," he said. "You have never shown a disposition to go gunning for Archies before, Tam." Tam shook his head. "It is a theory have, Sir R, he said. Yon Archie, the new feller, is being tried out. He is different to the rest. Mr. Austin had him the other night. Mr. Colbeck was nearly brought down yesterday morn. Every one in the squadron has had a taste of him, and every one in the squadron has been lucky." "That is a fact," said Austin. "This new gun is a terror." "But he has no hit any one," insisted Tam. "It's luck that he has no, but it's the sort of luck that the flyin' man has. Tomorrow the luck may be all the other way, and he'll bring down every one he aims at. My idea is that tomorrow we've got to get him, because if he makes good, in a month's time you won't be able to fly except at 16,000 feet. A light broke in on Blackie. "I see, Tam," he said, "so you were just hanging around to discourage him." Thocht it out," said Tam. Pictured my young friend William Von Archie shootin', surrounded by technical experts with long whiskers and spectacles. "It's a rotten gun you've got, Von," says they, "can ye no, bring doon one we airmen?" "G.I., me another 1,000 shots," gasps Willie, "and there'll be a vacant seat in the sergeant's mess, and so the afternoon wears away and the landscape is littered shell cases, but high in the air, glitterin' in the dyin' rays of the sun, sits the debonair Scoot, cool, resolute, and death-defyin'. That night the wires between the squadron headquarters and G.H.Q. hummed with information and inquiry. 100 aerodromes, from the North Sea to the Vosges, reported laconically that Annie, the vicious sister of Archie, was unknown. Tam lay in his bunk that night devouring the latest of his literary acquisitions. Tam's bunk was a 10-by-8 structure lined with varnished pine. The furniture consisted of a plain canvas bed, a large black box, a homemade cupboard and 3 bookshelves which ran the width of the wall facing the door. These were filled with thin, paper-covered volumes, luridly colored. Each of these issues consisted of 32 pages of indifferent print, and since the authors aimed at a maximum effect with an economy of effort, there were whole pages devoted to dialogue of a staccato character. He lay fully dressed upon the bed. A thick curtain retained the light which came from an electric bulb above his head, and his mind was absorbed with the breathless adventures of his cowboy hero. Now and again he would drop the book to his chest and gaze reflectively at the ceiling, for, all the time he had been reading, one half of his brain had been steadily pursuing a separate course of inquiry of its own, and while the other half had wandered pleasantly through deep and sunless gulches or had clambered on the back of a sure-footed bronco up precipitous mountain slopes, the mental picture he conjured was in the nature of a double exposure. Forever there loomed a dim figure of a mysterious anti-aircraft gun. He took up the book for about the 10th time and read 2 lines, when a bell in the corner of the room rang 3 times. 3 short thrills of sound and then silence. Tam slipped from the bed, lifted down his leather jacket from the wall and struggled into it. He took up his padded helmet, switched off the light and, opening the door, stepped out into the darkness. Buttoning his jacket as he went, he made his way across by a short cut to the hangars and found Blackie surrounded by half a dozen officers already on the spot. "Is that you, Tam? I want you to go up, there she goes." They listened. "Whoom. Fritz has sneaked across in the dark and is industriously bombing billets," he said. He dodged the creepers' patrol. "Go and see if you can find him." Whoom. The sound of the bursting bomb was nearer. "'Tis safer in the air," said Tam as he swung into his fuselage. Contact. A few seconds later, with a roar, the machine disappeared into the black wall of darkness. It came back in less than a minute well overhead, and Blackie, straining his eyes upward, followed its progress against the stars until it melted into the sky. "Whoom. He is looking for us," said Blackie. "Stand by your hangars." To the northwest 2 swift beams of light were sweeping the sky urgently. From a point farther south sprang another beam. "If Fritz doesn't locate us now he ought to be shot," growled Blackie. But apparently Fritz had overshot the aerodrome, for the next explosion came a mile to the west. "Tam will see the burst," said young Austin, and Blackie nodded. There were no other explosions and they waited for 10 minutes, then. Ticka 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 ticka. The sound came from right overhead. "Tam's got him," whooped Blackie. "The devil must have been flying low." "Taka taka taka taka. That's Fritz," said Blackie, "and that's Tam again." Then one of the waving searchlights strayed in their direction, and down its white beam for the space of 100 yards slid a ghostly white moth. It dipped suddenly and fell out of the light, and in its wake, but above, burst 3 little green balls of fire, Tam's totem and sign manual. "Landing lights," roared Blackie, and they had hardly been switched on when Tam swooped to the ground. In the meantime a motor car had gone swiftly in the direction of the fallen Hun machine. "He crashed," said Tam breathlessly, as he jumped to the ground. "I feared the poor body is hurt." But the poor body was neither hurt nor frightened, nor indeed had he crashed. In point of fact he had made a very good landing, considering the disadvantages under which he labored. They brought him into the mess room, a tall stripling with shaven head and blue laughing eyes, and he took the coffee they offered him with a courteous little bow and a click of his heels. "Baron von Treutzer," the prisoner introduced himself. "I was afraid that 1,000 meters was too low to fly, even at night," he said. "I suppose I didn't by any lucky chance get you. By the way, who brought me down?" "Tam. Tam it was," said Blackie cheerfully, "and you didn't get us." "I am sorry," said the Baron. "May I ask you whether it was Tam who was doing stunts over our new gun?" Blackie nodded. "I thought it was. They have been cursing him all the evening. I mean, of course, the technical people," he added hastily, as though to emphasize the fact that the Imperial Air Service was above resentment. "Naturally they swore you had some kind of armor on your machine, and though we told them it was most unlikely, they insisted. You know what obstinate people these manufacturers are. In fact, they say that they saw it glitter." He laughed softly. "You see," he went on, "they don't understand this game. They cannot understand why they're wonderful," he corrected himself swiftly, "why their gun did not get you. It would have been a terrible disappointment if they had brought you down and discovered that you were not sheeted in some new patent shell-proof steel." "Oh, I," said Tam, and he smiled, which was an unusual thing for Tam to do, and then he laughed, a deep, bubbling chuckle of laughter, which was even more unusual. "Oh, I," he said again, and was still laughing when he went out of the little anteroom. He did not go back to his bunk, but made his way to the workshop, and when he went up the next morning he carried with him, carefully strapped to the fuselage, a sheet of tin which he had industriously cut and punched full of rivet holes in the course of the night. "And what are you going to do with that, Tam?" asked Blackie. "That is ma new armor," said Tam solemnly. 'Tis a grand invention I made out of my own head. But what is the idea? Asked Blackie. Captain Blackie, sir, said Tam, I have a theory, and if you have no objection I'd like to try it out. Go ahead, said Blackie with a perplexed frown. At 11:30, Tam, having roved along the German frontline trenches and having amused himself by chasing a German spotter to earth, made what appeared to be a leisurely way back to that point of the Lille road where he had met with his adventures of the previous day. He was hoping to find the battery which he had worried at that time, and he was not disappointed. In the same area where he had met the guns before, they opened upon him. He circled round and located 6 pieces. Which of these was Annie? One he could silence at terrible risk to himself, but no more. To drop down, on the off chance of finding his quarry, was taking a gambler's chance, and Tam prided himself that he was no gambler. That the gun was there, he knew. Its shells were bursting ever upon his level and he was bumped and kicked by the violence of the concussions. As for the other guns, he ignored them, but from whence came the danger? He had unstrapped the tin plate and held it ready in his gloved hand, then there came a burst dangerously near. He banked over, side-slipped in the most natural manner and with all his strength flung the tin plate clear of the machine. Immediately after, he began to climb upward. He looked down, catching the glitter of the tin as it planed and swooped to the earth. He knew that those on the ground below thought he was hit. For a brief space of time the guns ceased firing and by the time they recommenced they fired short. Tam was now swooping round eastward farther and farther from range, and all the time he was climbing, till, at the end of half an hour, those who watched him saw only a little black speck in the sky. When he reached his elevation he began to circle back till he came above the guns and a little to the eastward. He was watching now intently. He had located the 6 by certain landmarks, and his eyes flickered from one point to the other. A drifting wisp of cloud helped him a little in the period of waiting. It served the purpose of concealment and he passed another quarter of an hour dodging eastward and westward from cover to cover until, heading back again to the west, he saw what he had been waiting for. Down charged the nose of the machine. Like a hawk dropping upon its prey he swooped down at 150 miles an hour, his eyes fixed upon one point. The guns did not see him until too late. Away to his right, 2 Archies crashed and missed him by the length of a street. He slowly flattened before he came over a gun which stood upon a big motor trolley screened by canvas and reeds, and he was not 50 yards from the ground when he released, with almost one motion, every bomb he carried. The explosion flung him up and tossed his little machine as though it were of paper. He gave one fleeting glance backward and saw the debris, caught a photographic glimpse of half a dozen motionless figures in the road, then set his roaring machine upward and homeward. It was not until a week afterward that the news leaked out that Herr Heinzel, one of Krupp's best designers, had been killed on the Western Front, and that information put the finishing touch to Tam's joy. But, asked the Brigadier General to whose attention Tam's act of genius had been brought, how did your man know it was the gun? You see, sir, said Blackie, Tam got to know that Fritz believed his machine was armored, and he thought they would be keen to see the armor, and so he took up a plate of tin and dropped it. What was more natural than that they should retrieve the armor and take it to the experts for examination? Tam waited till he saw the sunlight reflected on the tin near one of the guns, knew that he had found his objective, and dropped for it. An exceedingly ingenious idea, said the brigadier. This message Blackie conveyed to his subordinate. No, puffed up a boot it, said Tam. 'Twas a great waste o' good tin. Chapter V. The Law Breaker and Frightfulness. It is an unwritten law of all flying services that when an enemy machine bursts into flames in the course of an aerial combat the aggressor who has brought the catastrophe should leave well enough alone and allow his stricken enemy to fall unmolested. Lieutenant Callender, returning from a great and enjoyable strafe, was met by 3 fast scouts of the Imperial German Flying Service. He shot down one, when his gun was jammed. He banked over and dived to avoid the attentions of the foremost of his adversaries, but was hit by a chance bullet, his petrol tank was pierced and he suddenly found himself in the midst of noisy flames which said, "Hoo-oo." As he fell, to his amazement and wrath, one of his adversaries dropped after him, his machine gun going like a rattle. High above the combatants of 4th and 5th Machine, the one British and the other a unit of the American squadron, were tearing down skies. The pursuing plane saw his danger, banked round and sped for home, his companion being already on the way. "You're no gentleman," said Tam grimly, "and I'm goin' to strafe ye." Fortunately for the flying breaker of air laws, von Bissing's circus was performing stately measures in the heavens, and as von Bissing's circus consisted of 10 very fast flying machines, Tam decided that this was not the moment for vengeance and came round on a hairpin turn just as von Bissing signaled, "Attack." Tam got back to the aerodrome to discover that Calendar, somewhat burnt but immensely cheerful, was holding an indignation meeting, the subject under discussion being, the game and how it should be played. The brute knew jolly well I was crashing. "It's a monstrous thing. One was bound to meet fellows like that sooner or later," said Captain Blackie, the squadron commander, philosophically. "I suppose the supply of gentlemen does not go round, and they are getting some rubbish into the corps. One of you fellows drop a note over their aerodrome and ask them what the dickens they mean by it." "Did you see him, Tam?" Did that," said Tam, "that wee hoon was saved from destruction owing to circumstances o'er which had no control. Was on his tail." Ma bricked blue eyes were glancin' along the sixts of ma silver-plated Lewis gun, when speared the grand circus of Mr. Mac Bissing waiting to perform. Tam shook his head. "I'm hoping," said he, "that it was an act of mental aberration, that 'twas his first crash, and, carried away by the excitement and enthusiasm of the moment, the little feller fell into sin. I'm hoping that retribution is awaiting him. Ma wee Hindenburg," says Mr. Mac Bissing, stern and ruthless, "did I no see ye behavin' in a manner likely to bring discredit upon the imperial and all highest air service of our exalted and talkative Kaiser? Hoke, hoke, hoke. Little Willie Hindenburg hangs his hide. Baron, or, ma lord, as the case may be," says he, "I'll no be tellin' ye a lie. I was not messel. That last wee dram of sauerkraut got me all lit up like a picture palace." Says he, "I didn't know whether it was on ma hide or somebody else's," says he, "I'll admit the allegation and I throw messel, on the mercy o' the court." "Hand me ma strop," says Mac Bissing, pale but determined, and a few minutes later a passer-by might've have been arrested and even condemned to death by hearin' the sad and witch-like moans that came frae headquarters. That, little Willie Hindenburg, had not acted inadvertently, but that it was part of his gentle plan to strafe the strafed, an operation equivalent to kicking a man when he is down, was demonstrated the next morning, for when Thornton fell out of control, blazing from engine to tail, a German flying man, unmistakably the same as had disgraced himself on the previous day, came down on his tail, keeping a hail of bullets directed at the fuselage, though he might have saved himself the trouble, for both Thornton and Freeman, his observer, had long since fought their last fight. Again Tam was a witness, and again, like a raging tempest, he swept down upon the law-breaker and again was foiled by the vigilant German scouts from executing his vengeance. Tam had recently received from home a goodly batch of that literature which was his peculiar joy. He sat in his bunk on the night of his second adventure with the bad-mannered airman, turned the lurid cover of The 7 Warnings, the story of a cowboy's vengeance, and settled himself down to that good, long read, which was his chiefest and, indeed, his only recreation. He began reading at the little pine table. He continued curled up in the big armchair, retrieved from the attic of the shell-battered Chateau d'Anguien. He concluded the great work sitting cross-legged on his bed, and the very restlessness which the story provoked was a sure sign of its gripping interest. And when he had finished the little work of 32 pages, he turned back and read parts all over again, a terrific compliment to the shy and retiring author. He closed the book with a long sigh, sat upon his bed for half an hour and then went back to the pine table, took out from the debris of one of the drawers a bottle of ink, a pen and some notepaper, and wrote laboriously and carefully, ending the 7 or 8 lines of writing with a very respectable representation of a skull and crossbones. When he had finished, he drew an envelope toward him and sat looking at it for 5 minutes. He scratched his head and he scratched his chin and laid down his pen. It was 11 o'clock, and the mess would still be sitting engaged in discussion. He put out the light and made his way across the darkened aerodrome. Blackie saw him in the anteroom, for Tam enjoyed the privilege of entree at all times. His name. It's very curious you should ask that question, Tam, smiled Blackie. We've just had a message through from intelligence. One of his squadron has been brought down by the creepers, and they are so sick about him that this fellow who was caught by the creepers gave him away. His name is Von Maul, the son of a very rich pal of the Kaiser, and a real bad egg. Von Maul, repeated Tam slowly, and he will be belongin' to the Rowlers lot, I'm thinkin'. Blackie nodded. They complain bitterly that he is not a gentleman, he said, and they would kick him out but for the fact that he has this influence. Why did you want to know? Sir, said Tam solemnly, I high a grand stunt. He went back to his room and addressed the envelope. Mr. Von Maul. The next morning when the well-born members of the 95th Squadron of the Imperial German Air Service were making their final preparations to ascend, a black speck appeared in the sky. Captain Karl von Ziegelmann fixed the speck with his Zeiss glasses and swore. That is an English machine, he said, those Bavarian swine have let him through. Take cover. The group in the aerodrome scattered. The Archie fire grew more and more furious and the sky was flecked with the smoke of bursting shell, but the little visitor came slowly and inexorably onward. Then came 3 resounding crashes as the bombs dropped. One got the corner of a hangar and demolished it. Another burst into the open and did no damage, but the third fell plumb between 2 machines waiting to go up and left them tangled and burning. The German squadron leader saw the machine bank over and saw, too, something that was fluttering down slowly to the earth. He called his orderly. There's a parachute falling outside Fritz. Go and get it. He turned to his second in command. We shall find, Muller, that this visitor is not wholly unconnected with our dear friend Von Maul. I wish Von Maul had been under that bomb, grumbled his subordinate. Can't we do something to get rid of him, Herr Captain? Ziegelmann shook his head. I have suggested it and had a rap over the knuckles for my pains. The fellow is getting us a very bad name. 5 minutes later his orderly came to the group of which Ziegelmann was the center and handed him a small linen parachute and a weighted bag. The squadron leader was cutting the string which bound the mouth of the bag when a shrill voice said, Herr Captain, do be careful, there might be a bomb. There was a little chuckle of laughter from the group, and Ziegelmann glowered at the speaker, a tall, unprepossessing youth whose face was red with excitement. Herr von Maul, he snapped with true Prussian ferocity, the air services do not descend to such tricks nor do they shoot at burning machines. Herr Captain, spluttered the youth, I do what I think is my duty to my Kaiser and my fatherland. He saluted religiously. To this there was no reply, as he well knew, and Captain Ziegelmann finished his work in silence. The bag was opened. He put in his hand and took out a letter. I thought so, he said, looking at the address, this is for you, Von Maul. He handed it to the youth, who tore open the envelope. They crowded about him and read it over his shoulder. This is the first warning of the Avenger. Shakein year shoes. Tremble. Surround Yesel, with guards and walls and hide behind the cannon balls, and dig Yesel, into the earth. Ye'll yet regret year day of birth. For Tam the scoot is on year track and soon year dome will start to crack. It was signed with a skull and crossbones. The young man looked bewildered from one to the other. Every face was straight. What is this? He stammered, is it not absurd? Is it not frivolous, Herr Captain? He laughed his high, shrill little laugh, but nobody uttered a sound. This is serious, of course, Von Maul, said Ziegelmann soberly. Although this is your private quarrel, the squadron will do its best to save you. But this is stupid foolishness, said Von Maul as he savagely tore the note into little pieces and flung them down. I will go after this fellow and kill him. I will deal with this Herr Tam. You will do as you wish, Herr von Maul, but first you shall pick up those pieces of paper, for it is my order that the aerodrome shall be kept clean. Tam swooped back to his headquarters in time for breakfast and made his report. The next time you do tricks over Rowlers they'll be waiting for you, Tam, said Blackie with a shake of his head. I shouldn't strain that warning stunt of yours. Sir, said Tam, I've no intention of riskin' government property. I'm not thinking of the machine, but of you. Was thinkin' the same way, said Tam coolly. 'Twould be a national calamity. Doot, but even the Scotsman would be thrown into mournin'. Intelligence reaches us, says our great contemporary, from the Western Front, which will bring sorrow to nearly every Scottish home reached by our widely circulated journal, and, even to others. Tam the Scout, the intrepid airman, has gone west. The wee hero tackled single-handed 35 enemy buses, to wit, Mr. Macbissing Circus, and fell, a victim to his own indomitable fury and hot temper, after destroying 31 of the enemy. Lasky papers, if there are any, please copy. That Blackie's fears were well founded was proved later in the morning. Tam found the way to Rowlers barred by an Archie barrage which it would have been folly to challenge. He turned south, avoiding certain cloud masses, and had the gratification of seeing the circus swoop down from the fleece in a well-designed encircling formation. Tam swung round and made for Ypres, but again found a barring formation. He turned again, this time straight for home, dropping his post-bag. He had correctly addressed his letter and he knew it would be delivered. Shot down out of control a diving enemy machine that showed fight, chased a slow spotter to earth, and flashed over the British trenches less than 200 feet from the ground with his wings shot to ribbons, for the circus had got to within machine-gun range. A week later Lieutenant von Moll crossed the British lines at a height of 1,500 feet, bombed a billet and a casualty clearing station and dropped an insolent note addressed to the Englishman Tam. He did not wait for an answer, which came at 1 o'clock on the following morning, a noisy and a terrifying answer. "This has ceased to be amusing," said Captain von Ziegelmann, emerging from his bomb-proof shelter, and wired a requisition for 3 machines to replace those destroyed by enemy action, and approval for certain measures of reprisal. "As for that pig dog von Moll, he has received his 5th warning," said his unsmiling junior, "and he is not happy." Von Moll was decidedly not happy. His commandant found him rather pale and shaking, sitting in his room. He leapt up as von Ziegelmann entered, clicked his heels and saluted. Without a word the commandant took the letter from his hand and read. "If ye go to Germany I'll follow ye. If ye gie hame to yer mither I'll find the house and bomb ye. I'll never leave ye, Macmoll. Tam the Avenger." "So," was von Ziegelmann's comment. "It is rascality. It is monstrous," squeaked the lieutenant. "It is against the rules of war. What shall I do, Herr Captain?" "Go up and find Tam and shoot him," said Ziegelmann dryly. "It is a simple matter." But, do you believe?" Ziegelmann nodded. "I think he will keep his word. Do not forget, Herr Lieutenant, that Tam brought down von Müller, the greatest airman that the fatherland ever knew." Von Müller. The young man's face went a shade paler. The story of von Müller and his feud with an English airman and of the disastrous sequel to that feud was common knowledge throughout Germany. Walking back to command headquarters, von Ziegelmann expressed his private views to his confidant. "If Tam can scare this money bag back to Frankfurt, he will render us a service. He asked me where I thought he would be safe. He is thinking of asking for a transfer to the Eastern Front," said Ziegelmann's assistant. "And you said?" "I told him that the only safe place was a British prison camp." "Please the good God he reaches there," said Ziegelmann piously, "but he will be a fortunate man if he ever lands alive from a fight with Tam. Do not, I command you, allow him to go up alone. We must guard the swine, keep him in the formation." Von Ziegelmann went up in his roaring little single-seater and ranged the air behind the German lines, seeking Tam. By sheer luck he was brought down by a chance Archie shell and fell with a sprained ankle in the German support trenches, facing Armentières. "A warning to me to leave Moll to fight his own quarrels," he said as he limped from the car which had been sent to bring him in. There comes to every man to whom has been interpreted the meaning of fear a moment of exquisite doubt in his own courage, a bewildering collapse of faith that begins in uneasy fears and ends in blind panic. Von Moll had courage. An airman cannot be denied that quality whatever his nationality may be, but it was a mechanical valor based upon an honest belief in the superiority of the average German over all, friends or rivals. He had come to the flying service from the corps of the guard, to the corps of the guard from the atmosphere of high finance, wherein men reduce all values to the denomination of the mark and appraise all virtues by the currency of the country in which that virtue is found. His supreme confidence in the mark evaporated under the iron rule of a colonel who owned 3 lakes and a range of mountains and an adjutant who had 4 surnames and used them all at once. His confidence in the superiority of German arms, somewhat shaken at Verdun, revived after his introduction to the flying service, attained to its zenith at the moment when he incurred the prejudices of Tam, and from that moment steadily declined. The deterioration of morale in a soldier is a difficult process to reduce to description. It may be said that it has its beginnings in respect for your enemy and reaches its culminating point in contempt for your comrades. Before you reach that point you have passed well beyond the stage when you had any belief in yourself. Von Moll had arrived at the level of descent when he detached himself from his comrades and sat brooding, his knuckles to his teeth, reviewing his abilities and counting over all the acts of injustice to which he had been subjected. Von Ziegelmann, watching him, ordered him 14 days' leave, and the young officer accepted the privilege somewhat reluctantly. There was a dear fascination in the danger, he imagined. He had twice crossed fire with Tam and now knew him, his machine, and his tactics almost intimately. Von Moll left for Brussels en route for Frankfurt, and 2 days later occurred one of those odd accidents of war which have so often been witnessed. Tam was detailed to make one of a strong raiding party which had as its objective a town just over the Belgian-German frontier. It was carried out successfully and the party was on its way home when Tam, who was one of the fighting escort, was violently engaged by 2 machines, both of which he forced down. In the course of a combat he was compelled to come to within 1,000 feet of the ground and was on the point of climbing when, immediately beneath him, a long military railway train emerged from a tunnel. Tam carried no bombs, but he had 2 excellent machine guns, and he swooped joyously to the fray. A few feet from the ground he flattened and, running in the opposite direction to that which the train was taking, he loosed a torrent of fire into the side of the carriages. Von Moll, looking from the window of a first-class carriage, saw in a flash the machine and its pilot, then the window splintered to 1,000 pieces and he dropped white and palpitating to the floor. He came to Frankfurt to find his relations had gone to Karlsruhe and followed them. The night he arrived Karlsruhe was bombed by a French squadron. Von Moll saw only a score of flying and vengeful Tams. He came back to the front broken in spirit and courage. The only place you can be safe is an English internment camp. He chewed his knuckles with fierce intentness and thought the matter over. Delayen ma 7th warnen, said Tam, for no, so sure that McMull is a boot. No, seen the wee cheel for a gay lang time. Honestly, Tam, said young Craig, the last of the Craigs, his 2 brothers having been shot down over Lille, do you really think you scare Fritz? Tam pulled at his cigar with a pained expression, removed the corona from his mouth, eyeing it with a disappointed sneer, and sniffed disparagingly before he replied. Sir, he said, the habits of the Hoon, or Gehrman, high been ma life study. Often in the nicht when ye gentlemen at the mess are smokin' bad cigars and, playin' the gamblin' game o' bridge whist, Tam o' the scoots is workin' oot problems in Gehrman's psyche, I forget the bonny word. There he sits, the wee man wi'out so much as a cigar to keep him company, thank ye, Sir, I'll not smoke it the no, but, 'twill be welcomed by one of the sufferin' mechanics, there sits Tam, gettin' into the mind, or substitute, of the Hoon. But do you seriously believe that you have scared him? Tam's eyes twinkled. Mr. Craig, Sir, what do ye fear worst in the world? Craig thought a moment. Snakes, he said. An' if ye wanted to strafe a feller as bad as ye could, would ye put him amongst snakes? I can't imagine anything more horrible, shuddered Craig. 'Tis the same with the Hoon. He goes in for frichtfulness because he's afraid of frichtfulness. He bombs little tunes because he's scared of his ain little tunes bein' bombed. He believes we get the wind up because he'd be silly terror if we did the same thing to him. Ye can always scare a Hoon, that's ma theory, Sir. Craig had no further opportunity for discussing the matter, for the next morning he was concussed in midair and retained sufficient sense to bring his machine to the ground. Unfortunately the ground was in the temporary occupation of the German. So Craig went philosophically into bondage. He was taken to German headquarters and handed over to von Ziegelmanzing for transport. "This is Mr. von Maul," introduced Ziegelman gravely. "They were going into lunch. You have heard of him." Craig raised his eyebrows, for the spirit of mischief was on him. "Von Maul," he said with well-assumed incredulity. "Why, I thought, oh, by the way, is today the 16th? "Tomorrow is the 16th, snarled von Maul. "What happens tomorrow, Herr Englishman?" "I beg your pardon," said Craig politely, "I'm afraid I cannot tell you, it would not be fair to Tam." And von Maul went out in a sweat of fear. From somewhere overhead came a sound like a snarl of a buzz saw as it bites into hard wood. Tam, who was walking along a deserted by-road, his hands in his breeches pockets, his forage cap at the back of his head, looked up and shaded his eyes. Something as big as a house fly, and black as that, was moving with painful slowness across the skies. Now, there is only one machine that makes a noise like a buzz saw going about its lawful business, and that is a British battle plane, and that this was such a machine, Tam knew. Why it should be flying at that height and in a direction opposite to that in which the battle line lay, was a mystery. Usually a machine begins to drop as it reaches our lines, even though its destination may be far beyond the aerodromes immediately behind the line, even, as in this case, when it was heading straight for the sea and the English coast. Nor was it customary for an aeroplane bound for Blighty to begin its voyage from some point behind the German lines. Tam stood for fully 5 minutes watching the leisurely speck winging westward, then he retraced his steps to the aerodrome. He found at the entrance a little group of officers who were equally interested. "What do you make of that bus, Tam?" asked Blackie. "She's British," said Tam cautiously. He reached out his hands for the glasses that Blackie was offering, and focused them on the disappearing machine. Long and silently he watched her. The sun had been behind a cloud, but now one ray caught the aeroplane for a moment and turned her into a sparkling star of light. Tam put down his glasses. "Yon's Mr. Craig's," he said impressively. "Craig's machine. What makes you think so?" "Sir," said Tam, "I wad know her anywhere. Yon's Mr. Craig's bus, right enough." Blackie turned quickly and ran to his office. He spun the handle of the telephone and gave a number. "That you, Calais? There's a Boche flying one of our machines gone in your direction." "Yes, one that came down in his lines last week." "A Fairlight battle plane. She's flying at 16,000 feet. Warned Dover." He hung up the telephone and turned back. Holiday makers at a certain British coast town were treated to the spectacle of an alarm. They gathered on the sands and on the front and watched a dozen English machines trekking upward in wide circles until they also were hovering specks in the sky. They saw them wheel suddenly and pass out to sea, and then those who possessed strong glasses noted a new speck coming from the east, and presently 13 machines were mixed up and confused, like the spots that come before the eyes of some one afflicted with a liver. From this pickle of dots one slowly descended, and the trained observers standing at a point of vantage whooped for joy, for that which seemed a slow descent was, in reality, moving twice as fast as the swiftest express train, and, moreover, they knew by certain signs that it was falling in flames. A gray destroyer, its 3 stacks belching black smoke, cut through the sea and circled about the debris of the burning machine. A little boat danced through the waves, and a young man was hauled from the wreckage uttering strange and bitter words of hate. They took him down to the ward room of the destroyer and propped him in the commander's armchair. A businesslike doctor dabbed 2 ugly cuts in his head with iodine and deftly encircled his brow with a bandage. A navigating lieutenant passed him a whiskey and soda. "If you speak English, my gentle lad," said the commander, "honor us with your rank, title, and official number." "Von Maul," snapped the young man, Royal Prussian Lieutenant of the Guard. "You take our breath away," said the commander. "Will you explain why you were flying a British machine carrying the Allied marks?" "I shall explain nothing," boomed the youth. He was not pleasant to look upon, for his head was closely shaven and his forehead receded. Not to be outdone in modesty, his chin was also of a retiring character. "Before I hand you over to the wild men of the Royal Naval Air Service, who, I understand, Eat little things like you on toast. Would you like to make any statement which will save you from the ignominious end which awaits all enterprising young heroes who come camouflaging as enterprising young Britons? Von Moll hesitated. I came, because I saw the machine, it had fallen in our lines, it was an impulse. He slipped his hand into his closely buttoned tunic and withdrew a thick wad of canvas-backed paper which, unfolded, revealed itself as a staff map of England. This he spread on the wardroom table and the commander observed that at certain places little red circles had been drawn. Uppingley, Canburn, Exchester, said the destroyer captain, but these aren't places of military importance, they are German internment camps. Exactly, said von Moll, that is where I go. In this he spoke the truth, for to one of these he went. Chapter V. The man behind the circus. There comes to every great artist a moment when a sense of the futility of his efforts weighs upon and well nigh crushes him. Such an oppression represents the reaction which follows or precedes much excellent work. The psychologist will, perhaps, fail to explain why this sense of emptiness so often comes before a man's best accomplishments, and what association there is between that dark hour of anguish which goes before the dawn of vision, and the perfect opportunity which invariably follows. Sergeant Pilot Tam struck a bad patch of luck. In the first place, he had missed a splendid chance of catching von Reinhoff, who with 31 crashes, to his credit came flaunting his immoral triumph in Tam's territory. Tam had the advantage of position and had attacked, and his guns had jammed. The luck was not altogether against him, for, if every man had his due, von Reinhoff should have added Tam's scalp to the list of his 31 victims. Tam only saved himself by taking the risk of a spinning nose-dive into that zone of comparative safety which is represented by the distance between the trajectories of high-angle guns and the flatter curve made by the flight of the 18-pounder shell. Nor were his troubles at an end that day, for later he received instructions to watch an observation balloon, which had been the recipient of certain embarrassing attentions from enemy aircraft. And in some miraculous fashion, though he was in an advantageous position to attack any daring intruder, he had been circumvented by a low-flying Fokker. The first hint he received that the observation balloon was in difficulties came when he saw the two observers leap into space with their parachutes, and a tiny spiral of smoke ascend from the fat and helpless sausage. Tam dived for the pirate machine firing both guns, then, for the second time that day, the mechanism of his gun went wrong. Accidents will happen, said the philosophical Blackie, you can't have it all your own way, Tam. If I were you I'd take a couple of days off, you can have 10 days leave if you like, you're entitled to it. But Tam shook his head. I'll talk, a day, sirrah, he said, for meditation and devotional exercise that wee bit gun. So he turned into the workshop and stripped the weapon, calling each part by name until he found, in a slovenly fitted ejector, reason and excuse for exercising his limitless vocabulary upon that faithless part. He also said many things about the workman who had fitted it. Angus Jones. Oh, Angus Jones, said Tam, shaking his head. Tam never spoke of anybody impersonally. They were christened instantly and became such individual realities that you could almost swear that you knew them, for Tam would carefully equip them with features and color, height and build, and frequently invented for the most unpopular of his imaginary people relatives of offensive reputations. Angus, ma wee lad, he murmured as his nimble fingers grew busy, ye've been drinkin' again. Nay, don't deny it. See ye comin' out of Hennessy's the forenoon. An' ye've a wife an' 6 children, the shame on ye to treat a queer woman so. Another blunder like this and ye'll lose yer job. A further fault was discovered in a stiff feed block, and here Tam grew bitter and personal. Will ye do this, Hector Brodie Mackay? Man, can ye meet the innocent gaze o' the passin' soldiery and, no, feel a murderer? An' a face like that, ravaged an' shon fra, vicious livin', for shame, ye scrimshankin', lazy guide for nothing. He worked far into the night, for he was tireless, and appeared on parade the next morning fresh and bright of eye. Tam, when you're feeling better I'd like you to dodge over the German lines. Behind Lille there's a new Hun Corps headquarters, and there's something unusual on. Tam went out that afternoon in the clear cold sky and found that there was indeed something doing. Lille was guarded as he had never remembered its being guarded before, by 3 belts of fighting machines. His first attempt to break through brought a veritable swarm of hornets about his ears. The air reverberated with Archie fire of a peculiar and unusual intensity long before he came within striking distance of the first zone. Tam saw the angry rush of the Guardian machines and turned his little Newport homeward. Alright. What's frickin' in ye?" he demanded indignantly, as they streaked behind his tail. No, anxious to put ma nose where it's no, wanted." He shook off his pursuers and turned on a wide circle, crossed the enemy's line on the Vimy Ridge and came back across the black coal fields near Billy Montagny. But his attempt to run the gauntlet and to cross Lille from the eastward met with no better success, and he escaped via Menin and the Ypres salient. "Ma lux out," he reported glumly. "There's no road into Lille or o'er Lille, ye'd better send a submarine up the Liza." Tam had never thoroughly learned the difference between the Yser and the Lee and gave both rivers a generic title. "Did you see any concentrations east of the town?" asked Blackie. "Beyond an epidemic of mad German airplanes and a violent eruption of Archies, the hateful enemy shows no sign o' life or movement," said Tam. "Man, I've never wanted so badly to look into Lille till now." Undoubtedly there was something to hide. Young Turpin, venturing where Tam had nearly trod, was shot down by gunfire and taken prisoner. Missile, a good flyer, was outfought by 3 opponents and slid home with a dead observer, limp and smiling in the fuselage. "Tomorrow at daybreak, look for Tam amongst the stars," said that worthy young man as he backed out of Blackie's office. "The disgustin' incivility o' the hoon has aroused the fictin' spirit o' the dead and gone MacTavishes. Every fiber in ma body, includin' ma suspenders, is tense wi, rage and horror." "A cigar, Tam?" "No, thank ye, sirrah," said Tam, waving aside the proffered case and extracting 2 cigars in one motion. "Well, perhaps I'd better. I've run out o' cigars, and the thousand ordered frae ma Glasgow factor hae been sunk by enemy action. This is no a bad cigar, Captain Blackie, sirrah. It's a vera passable smoke and no dear at 4 pence." "That cigar costs £8 100, said Blackie, nettled. "Ye'll end ye'r days in the Puirhouse," said Tam. True to his promise he swept over Lille the next morning and to his amazement no particular resistance was offered. He was challenged half-heartedly by a solitary machine, he was banged at by AA guns, but encountered nothing of that intensity of fire which met him on his earlier visit. And Lille was the Lille he knew, the 3 crooked boulevards, the jumble of small streets, an open space before the railway station. There was no evidence of any unusual happening, no extraordinary collection of rolling stock in the tangled sidings, or gatherings of troops in the outskirts of the town. Tam was puzzled and pushed eastward. He pursued his investigations as far as Roubaix, then swept southward to Douai. Here he came against exactly the same kind of resistance which he had found on his first visit to Lille. There were the 3 circles of fighting machines, the strengthened Archie batteries, the same furious eagerness to attack. Tam went home followed by 3 swift fighters. He led them to within gliding distance of the Allied lines, then he turned, and this time his guns served him, for he crashed one and forced one down. The 3rd went home and told Fritz all about it. "It's vera curious," said Tam, and Blackie agreed. Tam went out again the following morning, but this time not alone. 6 fighting machines, with Blackie leading, headed for Douai in battle formation. At Douai they met no resistance, the aerial concentration had vanished and, save for the conventional defenses, there was nothing to prevent their appearance over the town. That same afternoon Captain Sutton, R.F.C., looking for an interest in life over Menin, found it. He came back with his fuselage shot to chips and wet through from a smashed radiator. "So far as I can discover," he said, "all the circuses are hovering about Menin. Von Bissing's is there and von Reinhoff's, and I could almost swear I saw von Wenzel's Red Scouts." "Did you get over the town?" Sutton laughed. "I was a happy man when I reached our lines," he said. "Maybe they're trying out some new stunt," said Blackie. "Probably it is a plan of defense, a sort of divisional training. I'll send a report to G.H.Q. I don't like this concentration of circuses in our neighborhood. Now a circus is a strong squadron of German airplanes attached to no particular army, but employed on those sectors where its activities will be of most value at a critical time, and its appearance is invariably a cause for rejoicing among all red-blooded adventurers. 2 days after Blackie had made his report, von Bissing's world-renowned circus was giving a performance, and on this occasion was under royal and imperial patronage. 4. Drawn up by the side of the snowy road, some miles in the rear of the line were 6 big motor cars, and on a high bank near to the road was a small group of staff officers muffled from chin to heels in long gray overcoats, clumsily belted at the waist. Aloof from the group was a man of medium height, stoutly built and worn of face, whose expression was one of eager impatience. The face, caricatured 100,000 times, was hawk-like, the eyes bright and searching, the chin out-thrust. He had a nervous trick of jerking his head sideways as though he were everlastingly suffering from a crick in the neck. Now and again he raised his glasses to watch the leader as he controlled the evolutions of the 25 airplanes which constituted the circus. It was a sight well worth watching. First in a great V, like a flock of wild geese, the squadron swept across the sky, every machine in its station. Then, at a signal from the leader, the V broke into 3 diamond-shaped formations, with the leader at the apex of the triangle which the 3 flights formed. Another signal and the circus broke into momentary confusion, to reform with much banking and wheeling into a straight line, again with the leader ahead. Backward and forward swept the line, changed direction and wheeled until the machines formed a perfect circle in the sky. "Splendid," barked the man with the jerking head. An officer, who stood a few paces to his rear, stepped up smartly, saluted, and came rigidly to attention. "Splendid," said the other again. "You will tell Captain Baron von Bissing that I am pleased and that I intend bestowing upon him the order pour le mérite. His arrangements for my protection at Lille and Douai and Menin were perfect." "Majesty," said the officer, "your message shall be delivered." The sightseer swept the heavens again. "I presume that the other machine is posted as a sentinel," he said. "That is a most excellent idea, it is flying at an enormous height." "Who is the pilot?" The officer turned and beckoned one of the group behind him. "His Majesty wishes to know who is the pilot of the sentinel machine," he asked. The officer addressed raised his face to the heavens with a little frown. "The other machine, General," he repeated. "There is no other machine." He focused his glasses on the tiniest black spot in the skies. Long and seriously he viewed the lonely watcher, then, "General," he said hastily, "it is advisable that His Majesty should go." I cannot distinguish the machine, but it looks suspicious." Whoom, whoom. A field away, 2 great brown geysers of earth leapt up into the air and 2 deafening explosions set the bare branches of the trees swaying. Down the bank scrambled the distinguished party and in a few seconds the cars were streaking homeward. The circus was now climbing desperately, but the watcher on high had a big margin of safety. Whoom. Just to the rear of the last staff car fell the bomb, blowing a great hole in the paved road and scattering stones and debris over a wide area. The cars fled onward, skidding at every turn of the road, and the bombs followed or preceded them, or else flung up the earth to left or right. "That's the 10th and the last, thank God," said the sweating aide-de-camp. "Heaven and thunder, what an almost catastrophe." In the amazing spaces of the air, a lean face, pinched and blue with the cold, peered over the fuselage and watched the ant-like procession of pinpoint dots moving slowly along the snowy road. "That's my last," he said, and picking up an aerial torpedo from between his feet, he dropped it over the side. It struck the last car, which dissolved noisily into dust and splinters, while the force of the explosion overturned the car ahead. "A bonny shot," said Tam o' the Scoots complacently, and banked over as he turned for home. He shot a glance at the climbing circus and judged that there was no permanent advantage to be secured from an engagement. Nevertheless he loosed a drum of ammunition at the highest machine and grinned when he saw 2 rips appear in the wing of his machine. By the time he passed over the German line all the Archies in the world were blazing at him, but Tam was at an almost record height, the height where men go dizzy and sick and suffer from internal bleeding. Over the German frontline trenches he dipped steeply down, but such had been his altitude that he was still 10,000 feet high when he leveled out above his aerodrome. He descended in wide circles, his machine canted all the time at an angle of 45 degrees and lighted gently on the even surface of the field a quarter of an hour after he had crossed the line. He descended to the ground stiff and numb, and Bertram walked across from his own machine to make inquiries. "Parky, Tam." "It's no, so Parky, Mr. Bertram, Sir R," replied Tam cautiously. "Rot, Tam," said that youthful officer. "Why, your nose is blue." "A wheel," admitted Tam. "But that's no, cold, that's, will ye look at ma altitude record." The young man climbed into the fuselage, looked and gasped. "Dear lad," he said, "have you been to heaven?" "Vera near, Sir R," said Tam gravely, "another 10 gallons o' essence and, odd, made it. I've been that high that could see the sun risen tomorrow." He started to walk off to his quarters but stopped and turned back. "Don't go near Macbissing's carcass," he warned, "he's feelin' sore." Tam made a verbal report to Blackie, and Blackie got on to headquarters by phone. "Tam seems to have had an adventure, sir," he said, when he had induced H.Q. exchange to connect him with his general and gave the lurid details. "It might be Hindenburg," said the general thoughtfully. "He's on the Western Front somewhere, that may explain the appearance of the circuses, or it may have been a corps general showing off the circus to a few trippers from Berlin. They are always running Reichstag members and pressmen round this front. Get Tam to make a report, his own report, not one you have edited." Blackie heard him chuckle. "I showed the last one to the army commander and he was tickled to death. Hurry it along, I'm dying to see it." If there is one task which an airman dislikes more than any other, it is report writing. Tam was no exception, and his written accounts of the day's work were models of briefness. In the days of his extreme youth he had been engaged in labor which did not call for the clerical qualities, and roughly his written reports were modeled on the time sheets he was wont to render in that far-off period, when he dwelt in lodgings at Govan and worked at McArdle's shipbuilding yard. Thus, left aerodrome 6 a.m. Enemy patrols encountered 5 ditto chased 4. Ditto forced down 2 bombs dropped on Verler Station 5 and Circa and C. Fortunately Tam possessed a romantic and a poetical soul, and there were rare occasions when he would offer a lyrical account of his adventures containing more color and detail. As, for example, his account of his fight with Lieutenant Prince Zwartz Hamelin. "Oh, wad some power the gifty gay ustaaec orsels as ithers see us." Thus spake a high-end, princely Hun as he fired at Tam Wi, his Maxim gun. "Thinkin', na doot, that bonny lad was lookin', if no, feelin', bad. But Tam he stalled his wee machine and strafed young Zwartz Hamelin." It was Blackie who harnessed Tam's genius for description to the pencil of a stenographer, and thereafter, when a long report was needed by headquarters, there would appear at Tam's quarters one Corporal Alexander Brown, Blackie's secretary, and an amiable Cockney who wrote mystic characters in a notebook with great rapidity. "Is it ye, Alec?" said Tam, suspending his ablutions to open the door of his bunk. "Come away in, man. Is it a report ye want? Sit down on the bed and help yersel to the cigars. Ye'll find the whiskey in the decanter." Corporal Brown sat on the bed because he knew it was there. He dived into his pocket and produced a notebook, a pencil and a cigarette, because he knew they had existence, too. He did not attempt to search for the cigars and the whiskey because he had been fooled before, and had on 2 separate occasions searched the bunk for these delicacies under the unsmiling eyes of Tam and aided by Tam's advice, only to find in the end that Tam was as anxious to discover such treasures as the baffled corporal himself. "We will no proceed with the thrill and cereal," said Tam, spreading his towel on the window ledge and rolling down his shirt sleeves. "Are ye ready, Alec?" "Arfamo, Sergeant, have you got a match?" "Man, you're a cadger of the most appallin' description," said Tam severely. "I'm lookin' for'ard to the day when it'll be a court-martial offense to ask yer superior officer for matches. Here's one. Don't strike it till ye give me one of yer common cigarettes." The corporal produced a packet. I'll ask ye as a favor not to let the men know I've descended to this low and vulgar habit, said Tam. I'll take 2 or 3 as curiosities, I'd like to show the officers the kind o' poison the lower classes smoke. Here, leave me a couple, said the alarmed noncommissioned officer as Tam's skillful fingers half emptied the box. Be silent, said Tam, you're interruptin' ma train o' thoughts, what did I say last? You said nothing yet, replied the corporal, rescuing his depleted store. Here it begins, said Tam, and started. At 10 o'clock in the forenoon o' a clear but wintry day, a solitary airman might hae been seen wingin' his lane way amid the solitude o' the Aitchen skies. Aitchen skies? Queried the stenographer dubiously. It's poetry, said Tam. Got it oot o' a bit by Rudyard Kipling, The Burns o' England, and, don't interrupt. He seemed o'er young for sich an adventure. How old are you, Sergeant, if I may ask the question? Demanded the amanuensis. Ye may not ask, but I'll tell you, I'm 74 come Michaelmas, and I've never looked into the brickties o' a lassie since lost me wee Jean, who flit wi, a colonel o' dragoons, in the year the Battle of Balaclava was fought. Will ye shut yer face whilst I'm dictatin'? Sorry, murmured the corporal and poised his pencil. Suddenly, as the wee hero was guidin' his bus through the maze o' cluds, a strange sight met his ease. It was the carcass of Mac Bissing. They were evolutin' by numbers, performin' their great feat of balansin' and barebacked ridin', aerial trapeze and tightrope walkin', loopin' the loop by the death-defyin' brothers Fritz, together with many laughable and Emerson interludes by whimsical Walker, the Laird o' Laughter, the whole concludin' with a ground patriotic procession entitled Deutschland o'er all, or nearly all. I ain't seen a circus for years, said the corporal with a sigh. Lord, I used to love them girls in short skirts. Restrain yer amorous thoughts, Alec, warned Tam, and fix yer mind on literature. To proceed. Can it be, says our hero, can it be that Mr. Mac Bissing is doin' his stunts at 10:30 o' the clock in the cauld morn, for sheer love o' his sinister profession? No, says our young hero, no, says he has a distinguished audience as like as not. Spearin' o'er the side and, fixin' his expensive glasses on the groon, he espied Sax motor cars. The door was flung open and Blackie came in hurriedly. Tam, get up, he said briefly. All the damn circuses are out on a strafe, and we're it, von Bissing, von Reinhoff, and von Wenzel. They're coming straight here and I think they're out for blood. The history of that great aerial combat has been graphically told by the special correspondents. Von Bissing's formation, dead out of luck that day, was broken up by Archie fire and forced back. Von Wenzel was engaged by the 59th Squadron, providentially up in strength for a strafe of their own, and turned back, but the von Reinhoff group reached its objective before the machines were more than 5,000 feet from the ground and there was some wild bombing. Von Reinhoff might have unloaded his bombs and got away, but he showed deplorable judgment. To ensure an absolutely successful outcome to the attack, he ordered his machines to descend. Before he could recover altitude, the swift little scouts were up and into the formation. The air crackled with the sound of Lewis gunfire, machines reeled and staggered like drunken men, Tam's fighting moraine dipped and dived, climbed and swerved in a wild bacchanalian dance. Airplanes, British and German alike, fell flaming to the earth before the second in command of the enemy squadron signaled, retire. A mile away a battery of AA guns waited, its commander's eyes glued to a telescope. They're breaking off, stand by. Range 4,300 yards, deflection, there they go. Commence firing. A dozen batteries were waiting the signal. The air was filled with the shriek of speeding shells, the skies were mottled with patches of smoke, white and brown, where the charges burst. Von Reinhoff's battered squadron rode raggedly to safety. Got him, whoop! Yelled 1,000 voices, as from one machine there came a scatter of pieces as a high explosive shell burst under the wing, and the soaring bird collapsed and came trembling, slowly, head over heels to the ground. Von Reinhoff, that redoubtable man, was half-conscious when they pulled him out of the burnt and bloody wreck. He looked round sleepily at the group about him and asked in the voice of a very tired man. "Which, of you, fellows, bombed, our Kaiser?" Tam leant forward, his face blazing with excitement. "Say that again, Sir R," he said. Von Reinhoff looked at him through half-opened eyes. "Tam, he whispered. "You nearly put an empire in mourning." Tam drew a long breath, then turned away. "Nearly," he said bitterly. "Did no, tell ye, Captain Blackie, Sir R, that ma luck was oot." Chapter via question of rank. Tam stood in the doorway of squadron headquarters and saluted. "Come in, Sergeant McTavish," said Blackie, and Tam's heart went down into his boots. To be called by his surname was a happening which had only one significance. There was trouble of sorts, and Tam hated trouble. "There are some facts which General Headquarters have asked me to verify. Your age is 27. "Yes, Sir R. You hold the military medal, the French Médaille Militaire, the Russian Medal of St. George and the French Croix de Guerre." "Oh, aye, Captain Blackie, Sir R, but I've no worn 'em yet." "You were created King's Corporal for an act of valor on January 17, 1915. Blackie went on, consulting a paper. "Yes, Sir R." Blackie nodded. "That's all, Sergeant," he said, and as Tam saluted and turned, "Oh, by the way, Sergeant, we had a a staff officer here the other day and he reported rather unfavorably upon a practice of yours, ours. It was a question of discipline. You know it is not usual for a non-commissioned officer to be on such friendly terms with, officers. And I think he saw you in the anteroom of the mess. So I told him something which was not at the time exactly true." Tam nodded gravely. For the first time since he had been a soldier he had a horrid feeling of chagrin, of disappointment, of something that rebuffed and hurt. See, Sir R, he said, "'tis no, ma wish to put messel forward, and, if I've been a wee bit free wi, the young laddies there was no disrespect in it. No ma place and, no, ashamed o' it. There's a shipyard on the Clyde that's got ma name on its books as a fitter, that's ma job and, proud o' it. If you're thinkin', Captain Blackie, Sir R, that ma hide got big." No, Tam," said Blackie hastily, "I'm just telling you, so that you'll understand things when they happen." Tam saluted and walked away. He passed Brandspeth and Walker Giddens and responded to their flippant greetings with as stiff a salute as he was capable of offering. They stared after him in amazement. "What's the matter with Tam?" they demanded simultaneously, one of the other. Tam reached his room, closed and locked the door and sat down to unravel a confused situation. He had grown up with the squadron and had insensibly drifted into a relationship which had no counterpart in any other branch of the service. He was, Tam, unique and indefinable. He had few intimates of his own rank, and little association with his juniors. The mechanics treated him as being in a class apart and respected him since the day when, to the prejudice of good order and military discipline, he had followed a homesick boy who had deserted, found him and hammered him until nostalgia would have been a welcome relief. All deserters are shot, and the youth, having at first decided that death was preferable to a repetition of the thrashing he had received, changed his mind and was tearfully grateful. Sitting on his bed, his head between his hands, pondering this remarkable change which had come to the attitude of his officers and friends, Tam was sensible to his astonishment of the extraordinary development his mentality had undergone. He had come to the army resentfully, a rabid socialist with a keen contempt for the upper classes, which he had never concealed. The upper classes were people who wore high white collars, turned up the ends of their trousers and affected a monocle. They spoke a kind of drawling English and said, "By gad, dear old top, what perfectly beastly weather." They did no work and lived on the sweat of labor. They patronized the workman or ignored his existence, and only came to Scotland to shoot and fish, whereon they assumed with gillies and keepers of all kinds the national dress which Scotsmen never wear. That was the old conception, and Tam almost gasped as he realized how far he had traveled from his ancient faith. For all these boys he knew were of that class, most of them had an exaggerated accent and said, "By gad," but somehow he understood them and could see, beneath the externals, the fine and lovable qualities that were theirs. He had been taken into this strange and pleasant community and had felt, he did not exactly know what he had felt. All he did know was that a brass-hatted angel with red tabs on its collar stood at the gate of a little paradise of comradeship, and forbade further knowledge of its pleasant places. He pursed his lips and got to his feet, sick with a sense of his loss. He was of the people, a part. He was a Clydeside worker and they were the quality. He told himself this and knew that he lied. He and they stood on grounds of equality, they were men doing men's work and risking their lives one for the other. Tam whistled a dreary little tune, took down his cap and walked over to the workshops. There was a motorcycle which Branspeth told him he could use, and after a moment's hesitation, Tam wheeled the machine to the yard. Then he remembered that he was in his working tunic, and since it was his intention to utilize this day's leave in visiting a town at the rear of the lines, he decided to return to his bunk and change into his best. He opened his box, but his best tunic was missing. "Wheel, wheel," said Tam, puzzled, and summoned his Batman with a shrill whistle. "To tell you the truth, Sergeant," said the man, Mr. Walker Giddens and the other young officers came over for it 3 days ago. They got me to give it to 'em and made me promise I wouldn't say anything about it." Tam smiled quietly. "All right, Angus," he nodded and went back to his cycle. He did not know the joke, but it was one which would probably come to an untimely end, in view of the disciplinary measures which headquarters were taking. This incident meant another little pang, but the freshness of the morning and the exhilaration of the ride, for motorcycling has thrills which aviation does not know, helped banish all thoughts of an unpleasant morning. He reached his destination, made a few purchases, drank an agreeable cup of coffee and discovered that he had exhausted all the joys which the town held. He had intended amusing himself through the day and returning at night, but, even before the restaurants began to fill for lunch he was bored and irritable, and strapping his purchases to the back of the cycle he mounted the machine and began his homeward journey. It was in the little village street. Anton, in reality a suburb of the town, that he met adventure so novel, so bewildering, that he felt that he had been singled out by fate for such an experience as had never before fallen to mortal man. He met a girl. He met her violently, for she was speeding along a road behind the wheel of a small motor ambulance, and it happened that the road in question ran at right angles to that which Tam was following. Both saw the danger a few seconds before the collision occurred, both applied fierce brakes, but, nevertheless, Tam found himself on his hands and knees at the feet of the lady driver, having taken a perler almost into her lap, despite the printed warning attached to this portion of the ambulance. "Driver and orderlies only." "Oh, I do hope you aren't hurt," said the girl anxiously. Tam picked himself up, dusted his hands and his knees and surveyed her severely. She was rather small of stature and very pretty. A shrapnel helmet was set at a rockish angle over her golden brown hair, and she wore the uniform of a Red Cross driver. "It was my fault," she went on. "This is only a secondary road and yours is the main. I should have slowed, but I guess I was thinking of things. I often do that." She was obviously American and Tam's slow smile was free of malice. "It's fine to think of things," he said, "especially when you're drivin' an ambulance, but it's a hairse ye ought to be drivin', mistress, if ye want to gie yer thoughts a good airin'." "I'm really sorry," said the girl penitently. "I'm afraid your cycle is smashed." "Don't let it worry ye," said Tam calmly. "It's no bike anyway, it belongs to one of the hated few, governin' classes, and 'ave nothin' to do but guide the damage." "Oh," said the girl blankly, then she suddenly went red. "Of course," she began awkwardly, "as I was responsible, I can well afford." She halted lamely and Tam's eyes twinkled. "Maybe you're the niece of Andrew Carnegie and ye've had yer monthly library allowance," he said gravely, "and maybe ye could spare a few $1,000s or cents, I've no got the exact coinage in ma mind, to help a wee feller buy a new whizzer wheel. Take it kindly, but guide money makes bad friends." "I didn't intend offering you money," she said hurriedly, flushing deeper than ever. "Let me pull the car up to the side of the road." Tam examined his own battered machine in the meantime. The front wheel had buckled, but this was easily remedied, and by the time the girl had brought her car to rest in a field he had repaired all the important damage. "I was going to stop somewhere about here for lunch," she said, producing a basket from under the seat. In fact, I was thinking of lunch when a nose dived onto ye, said Tam, preparing to depart. Weel, I'll be gettin' along. There's nothing can do for ye. You can stay and lunch with me. I've hide ma dinner, said Tam hastily. What did you have? She demanded. Roast beef and rice pudding, said Tam glibly. I don't believe you, anyway I guess it won't hurt you to watch me eat. Tam noticed that she took it for granted that he was lying, for she served him with a portion of her simple meal and he accepted the situation without protest. I'm an American, you know, she said as they sat cross-legged on the grass. I come from Jackson, Connecticut, you've heard of Jackson. Oh, aye, he replied. I'm frae Lasky. That's Scotland, I like the Scotch. Tam blushed and choked. I came over last year to drive an ambulance in the American ambulance section, but they wouldn't have me, so I just went into the English Red Cross. British, corrected Tam. I shall say English if I like, she defied him. Weel, said Tam, it's no, for me to check ye if ye won't be educated. She stared at him, then burst into a ringing laugh. My, the Scotch people are funny, tell me about Scotland. Is it a wonderful country? Do you know about Bruce and Wallace and Rob Roy and all those people? Oh, aye, said Tam cautiously, by what I read in the paper it's a gay fine country. And the red deer and glens and things, it must be lovely. I've seen ground pictures of a glen, admitted Tam, but the red deer in Glasgow air no, say plentiful, as they used to be, I'm thinkin' the shipyard bummer hay scared 'em away. She shot a sharp glance at him, then, it seemed for the first time, noticed his stripes. Oh, you're a sergeant, she said. I thought by your wings, you were an officer. I didn't know that sergeants. Tam smiled at her confusion and when he smiled there was an infinite sweetness in the action. You're right, mistress. I'm a sergeant, and, thoughta, the time ye were mistaken me for an officer, and, no, the heart to stop ye, for it's a vera lang time since spoke a lady, and, it was vera fine. He rose slowly and walked to his cycle, she ran after him and laid her hand on his arm. I've been a low snob, she said frankly. I beg your pardon, and you're not to go, because I wanted to ask you about a sergeant of your corps, you know the man that everybody is talking about. He bombed the Kaiser's staff the other day. You've heard about it, haven't you? Tam kept his eyes on the distant horizon. Oh, he's no say much o' a fellow, a wee chap awfu, conceido himself. Nonsense. She scoffed. Why, Captain Blackie told me. Suddenly, she stepped back and gazed at him wide-eyed. Why, you're Tam. Tam went red. Of course you're Tam, you never wear your medal ribbons, do you? You're called mistress, said Tam as he saluted awkwardly and started to push his machine. They call me sergeant, and it's no such a bad rank. He left her standing with heightened color, blaming herself bitterly for her gaucherie. So it made that difference, too. For some reason he did not feel hurt or unhappy. He was in his most philosophical mood when he reached his aerodrome. He had a cause for gratification in that she knew his name. Evidently, it was something to be a sergeant if by so being you stand out from the ruck of men. As to her name he had neither thought it opportune nor proper to advance inquiries. He smiled as he changed into his working clothes and wondered why. A dozen girl drivers were waiting on the broad road before the 131st General Hospital the next morning, exchanging views on the big things which were happening in their little world, when one spied an airplane. Gracious, isn't it high? I wonder if it's a German. They're bombing hospitals. It's British. Silly. No, it's a German. I saw one just like that over Popperingham. It's coming right over. Stand by your cars, ladies, please. The tall chief's sharp voice scattered the groups. He's dropping something. It's a bomb. No, it's a message bag. Look at the streamers. A bag it was, and when they raced to the field in which it fell they discovered that it was improvised, roughly sewn and weighted with sand. The superintendent read the label and frowned. To the driver of Ambulance B. T 9743, 131st General Hospital, this is evidently for you, Miss Larimore. For me, Mrs. Crane. Vera Larimore came forward, a picture of astonishment, and took the bag. "Oh, what fun, who is it, Vera? Open it quickly." The girl pulled open the bag and took out a letter. It bore the same address as that which had been written on the label. Slowly she tore off the end of the envelope. There was a single sheet of paper written in a boyish hand. Without any preliminary it ran: "A sergeant pilot, feelin' sair, a spatefu, thing may do, and so I come to you once mair that I may say, and true, as you looked doon on me and day, now I look doon on you. You, fra your height of pride and clan heard your high spirit ca, and so you scorned the common man. I saw your sweet face fa, but, losh, I'm just that mighty high I can't see you at a." It was signed, T, and the girl's eyes danced with joy. She shaded her eyes and looked up. The tiny airplane was turning and she waved her handkerchief frantically. "A friend of yours?" asked the superintendent with ominous politeness. "Yes, it's Tam, Mrs. Crane. I ran into him, he ran into me yesterday." Tam. Even the severe superintendent was interested. "That remarkable man, I should like to see him. Everybody is talking about him just now." Was it a private letter or an official message from the aerodrome? "It was private," said the girl, very pink and a note of defiance in her voice, and the superintendent very wisely dropped the subject. "I really don't know how to send him an appropriate answer," said Vera to her confidant and roommate that evening. "I can't write poetry and I can't fly." "I shouldn't answer it," said her sensible friend briskly. "After all, my dear, you don't want to start a flirtation with a sergeant. I mean, it's hardly the thing, is it?" The little pajamaed figure sitting on the edge of the bed favored her friend with a cold stare. "I certainly am not thinking of a flirtation," she said icily, "but if I were, I should as certainly be unaffected by the rank of my victim. In America we aren't quite so strong for pedigrees and families as you English people." "Irish," said the other gently. Vera laughed as she curled up in the bed and drew her sheet up to her chin. "It's queer how people hate being called English, even Tam." "Look here, Vera," said her companion hotly, "just leave that young man alone. And please get all those silly, romantic ideas out of your head." A silence, then, "I'm going to write to him, tomorrow," said a sleepy voice, and the rapid fire of her friend's protest was answered with a well-simulated snore. Tam received the letter by messenger. "Dear Mr. Tam," it ran, "I know that is your Christian name, but I really do not know your other, so will you please excuse me? I am going into Amiens next Friday, and if you have quite forgiven me, will you please meet me for lunch at the Café Street? Pierre. And thank you so much for your very clever verse." "Vera Larimore," repeated Tam. "I've no doot she's Scottish." He trod air that week, literally and figuratively, for the work was heavy. The high winds which had kept the British squadrons to the ground petered out to gentle breezes, and the air was alive with craft. Bombing raid, photographic reconnaissance and long-distance scouting kept the airmen busy. New squadrons appeared which had never been seen before on this front. The Franco-American unit came up from X, and did some very audible fraternizing with what was locally known as Blackie's Lot, a circumstance which ordinarily would have caused Tam's heart to rejoice. But Tam was keeping clear of the mess room just now, and he either sent an orderly with his messages or waited religiously on the mat. As for the officers, he avoided them unless, as was often the case, they sought him out. Brandspeth brought one of the new men over to his bunk the night the American contingent arrived. "I want you to meet an American officer, Tam," he yelled. "Don't be an ass, open the door." He was on one side of the locked door and Tam was on the other. Tam turned the key reluctantly and admitted the visitors. No, wishin' to be uns evil, Mr. Brandspeth, but Captain Blackie will strafe ye if he finds ye here." "Rubbish. I want you to meet Mr. Larimore." Tam looked at the keen-faced young athlete and slowly extended his hand. "I think you know my sister," said the smiling youth, "and certainly we all know you." He gave the pilot a grip which would have crushed a hand of ordinary muscularity. "I've run up against the young lady in ma travels," said Tam solemnly. Larimore laughed. "I saw her for a moment today and she asked me to remind you of your appointment." "An appointment, with a lady?" "Oh, Tam. said the shocked Brandspeth, producing from his overcoat pocket a siphon of soda, a large flask of amber-brown liquid and a bundle of cigars, and setting them upon the table. Really, Tam is always making the strangest acquaintances. He never met anybody stranger than Vera, or better, said Larimore, with a little laugh. Vera, I suppose, is worth $1 million. She is a citizen of a neutral country. She can have the bulliest time any girl could desire, and yet she elects to come to France, drive a car over abominable roads which are more often than not under shell fire, and sleep in a leaky old shack for 40 cents a day. Brandspeth was filling the glasses. You're a neutral, too, say when, I suppose you're not exactly a pauper and yet you risk breaking your neck for 10 francs per. Help yourself to a cigar, Tam, I said a cigar. Try one o' mine, sirrah, said Tam coolly, and produced a box of perfectos from under his bed. Ye may take one apiece and it's fair to tell ye I've counted them. They spent a moderate but joyous evening, but Tam, standing in the doorway of his bunk, watched the figures of his guests receding into the darkness with a sense of depression. He had no social ambitions, he had no desire to be anything other than the man he was. If he looked forward to his return to civil life at the war's end, he did so with equanimity, though that return meant a life in soiled overalls amid the hum and clang of a factory shop. He had none of that divine discontent which is half the equipment of Scottish youth. Rather did he possess ambition's surest antidote in a mild and kindly cynicism which stripped endeavor of its illusions. It was on the Wednesday night after he had written a polite little note to the 131st General Hospital accepting the invitation to lunch and had received one of Blackie's tentative permits to take a day's leave, Tam called them D.V. passes, that the blow fell. Angus, said Tam to his Batman, while on Braven the terrors of the fourth dimension in the morn. Is that the new scoutin' machine, Sergeant? Demanded the interested Batman. The fourth dimension, ma puir frien, is a term applied by philosophers of the Royal Flyin' Co-op to the space between France and heaven. Oh, you mean the hair, said the disappointed servant. Mean the hair, replied Tam gravely, not the hair that stands up when your petrol tank goes dry nor the hair your poachin' ancestors stole from the laird o' the manor, but the hair ye breathe when you're no smokin'. An', while I'm away in the morn want ye to go to Mr. Brandspeth's servant and get ma new tunic. I'm going to a party at Amiens on Friday, and no anxious to be walkin' doon the palm court of the Café Street. Pierre in ma auld tunic. Anyway, said the Batman, busily brushing that same auld tunic, you wouldn't be walkin' into the Café Street. Pierre. And why not? Because, said the Batman triumphantly, that's one of the cafés reserved for officers only. There was a silence. Then, are ye sure o' that, Angus? Sure, Sergeant, I was in Amiens for 3 months. Tam said nothing and presently began whistling softly. He walked to his bookshelf, took down a thin, paper-covered volume and sank back on the bed. That will do, Angus, he said presently, call me at 5. The barriers were up all around, they had been erected in the course of a short week. They penned him to his class, confined him to certain narrow roads from whence he might see all that was desirable but forbidden. He was so silent the next morning, when he joined the big squadron that was assembling on the flying field, that Blackie did not know he was there. Where's Tam? Oh, here you are. You know your position in the formation. Right point to cover the right of the American bombing squad. Mr. Sutton before you and Mr. Benson behind. You will get turning signals from me. Altitude 12,000, that will be 2,000 feet above the bombers, no need to tell you anything. The objective is Bapaume and Akiat junctions. Tam answered shortly and climbed into his fuselage. The squadron went up in twos, the fighting machines first, the heavier bombing airplanes last. For 20 minutes they maneuvered for position, and presently the leader's machine spluttered little balls of colored lights and the squadron moved eastward, a great diamond-shaped flock, filling the air and the earth with a tremulous roar of sound. They reached their objectives without effective opposition. First, the junction to the north of Bapaume, then the web of sidings at Akiat smoked and flamed under the heavy bombardment. Quick splashes of light where the bombs exploded, great columns of gray smoke mushrooming up to the sky, then feeble licks of flame growing in intensity of brightness where the incendiary bombs, taking hold of stores and hutments, advertised the success of the raid. The squadron swung for home. Tam, with one eye for his leader and one for the possible dangers on his flank, was a mere automaton. There was no opportunity for displaying initiative, he was a cog in the wheel. Suddenly a new signal glowed from the leading machine and Tam threw a quick glance left and right and began to climb. The other fighters were rising steeply, though not at such an angle that they could not see their leader, who was a little higher than they. Another signal and they flattened, and Tam saw all that he had guessed. "Ma guidness," said Tam, "the sky stiff buses. There must have been 40 enemy machines between the squadron and home." So far as Tam could see there were 8 separate formations and they were converging from 3 points of the compass. The safety of the squadron depended upon the individual genius of the fighters. Tam swerved to the right and dipped to the attack, his machine gun spraying his nearest opponent. Sutton, ahead of him, was already engaged, and he guessed that Benson, in his rear, had his hands full. Tam's nearest opponent went down sideways, his second funked the encounter and careered wildly away to his left and immediately lost position to attack, for when two forces are approaching one another at 80 miles an hour, failure to seize the psychological moment for striking your blow leaves you in 1 minute exactly 3 miles to the rear of your opponent. The first shock was over in exactly 35 seconds, and beneath the spot where the squadron had passed 7 machines were diving or circling earthward, the majority of these in flames. The second shock came 3 minutes later and again the squadron triumphed. Then Tam, looking down, saw one of the bombing machines turn out of the line, and at the same time Blackie signaled, "Cover stragglers." The squadron was now well behind the British lines, but they were south of the aerodrome, having changed direction to meet the attacks. Tam with a little leap of heart recognized in the distance a familiar triangular field of unsullied snow, searched for and found the rectangular block of tiny huts which formed No. 131 General Hospital and turned out of the line with a wild sense of exhilaration. "She'll no, see me eat," he said, "but she shall see a ground ficht." The bomber was swerving and dipping like a helpless wild duck seeking to shake off the 3 hawks that were now hovering over her. "Let you be Larimer's machine, O Lord," prayed Tam, and he prayed with the assurance that his prayer was already answered. He came at the leading German and for a second the 2 machines streamed nickel at one another. Tam felt the wind of the bullets and knew his machine was struck. Then his enemy crumpled and fell. He did not wait to investigate. The bomber was firing up at his nearest opponent when Tam took the third in enfilade and saw the pilot's head disappear behind the protective armoring. He swung round and saw the bombing machine diving straight for the earth with the German scout on his tail. Tam followed in a dizzy drop. 3,000 feet from earth the bombing machine turned a complete somersault and Tam's heart leapt into his mouth. He banked over to follow the pursuing German and in the brief space of time which intervened before his enemy could adjust his direction to cover pilot and gunner, Tam had both in line. His 2 guns trembled and flamed for 4 seconds and then the German dropped straight for earth and crashed in a flurry of smoke and flying debris. Tam looked backward. The bomber had pancaked and was drifting to a landing, the squadron was out of sight. Tam glided to the broad field before the hospital. "I knew it was you, I knew it was you." He looked down from the fuselage at the bright upturned face. "Oh, aye, it was me," he admitted, "and, mighty glad ye was lookin', for was throwin' stunts for ye." He was on the ground now, loosening the collar of his leather jacket. He stepped clear of the obstructing planes of his machine and looked anxiously toward the gentle slopes of the ridge on which the bomber had landed. "Thank the guide Lord," he said and sighed his relief. He was making a careful inspection of his own machine preparatory to returning to the aerodrome when the girl came running across the field to say goodbye. "I can't tell you just how I feel, how grateful I am. My brother says you saved his life. He was in that other machine, you know." Knew it," said Tam. "'Twas a ground adventure, like you read aboot in books, 'twas ma low, theatrical mind that wanted it so. Goodbye, young lady. Till tomorrow, don't forget you're lunching with me at the Café Street. Pierre." Tam smiled gravely. "I'm afraid ye'll have to postpone that lunch," he said, "till Till tomorrow, she interrupted firmly, and Tam flew back to the aerodrome without explaining. He was feeling the reaction of the morning's thrill, and when he landed he had no answer to make to the congratulations which were poured upon him. He made his way to his hut. His Batman was cleaning a pair of boots and stood stiffly as Tam entered. "That'll do, Angus, ye may go," he said, and then saw the folded coat upon his bed. "Ah, ye got it back, did ye? Well, I'll no be needin' it." He picked up the coat and frowned. "This is no mine, Angus. Your tunic is in the box, sir. This is the one the officers had made for you. They wanted your other tunic for the measurements." Tam looked at the man. "Yon's an officer's tunic, Angus," he said, "and why do ye say, sir, to me?" Angus beamed and saluted with a flourish. "It's in general orders this morning, sir. You've got a commission, and Mr. Branspeth says that the mess will be expectin' you to lunch at 1:30. Tam sat down on the bed, biting his lip. "Get oot, Angus," he said huskily, "and stay you. Ye'll find a cigar in the box under the bed, and, Angus, I'm lunchin' oot tomorrow." Chapter X: A Reprisal Raid. There are certain animals famous to every member of the British Expeditionary Force. There is a Welsh regiment's goat which ate up the plan of attack issued by a brigadier general, who bore a striking resemblance to somebody who was not Napoleon, thus saving the Welsh regiment from annihilation and reproach. There is the dog of the Middlesex regiment, who always bit staff officers and was 14 times condemned to death by elderly and irascible colonels, and 14 times rescued by his devoted comrades. There is the Canadian's tame chicken, who sat waiting for 9-inch shells to fall, and then scratched over the ground they had disturbed, and there is last, but not least, that famous mascot of General Hospital 131, Hector O'Brien. Hector O'Brien was born in the deep Sofa Congo forest. Of his early life little is known, but as far as can be gathered, he made his way to France by way of Egypt and Gallipoli and was presented by a grateful patient to the nursing sisters and ambulance staff of 131, and by them was adopted with enthusiasm. Hector O'Brien did precious little to earn either fame or notoriety until one memorable day. He used to sit in the surgery, before a large packing case, wistfully watching the skies and scratching himself in an absent-minded manner. A chimpanzee may not cogitate very profoundly, and the statement that he is a deep thinker though an indifferent conversationalist has yet to be proved, but it is certain that Hector O'Brien was a student of medicine, and that he did, on this memorable day to which reference has been made, perambulate the wards of that hospital from bed to bed, feeling pulses and shaking his head in a sort of melancholy helplessness which brought joy to the heart of 800 patients, some 100 doctors, nurses and orderlies, and did not in any way disturb the melancholy principal medical officer, who was wholly unconscious of Hector's impertinent imitations. Second Lieutenant Tam, who was a frequent visitor at 131, had at an early stage struck up a friendship with Hector and had, I believe, taken him on patrol duty, Hector strapped tightly to the seat, holding with a grip of iron to the fuselage and chattering excitedly. Thereafter, upon the little uniform jacket which Hector wore on state occasions was stitched the wings of a trained pilot. It is necessary to explain Hector's association with the R.F.C., in order that the significance of the subsequent adventure may be thoroughly appreciated. Tam was up one day and on a particular mission. He looked down upon a big and irregular checker board covered with numbers of mad white lines, which radiated from a white center and seemed to run frantically in all directions save one. Across that course, and running parallel beneath 3 of them was a straight silver thread. At the edge of his vision and beyond the place where the white lines ended abruptly, there were 2 irregular zigzags of yellow running roughly parallel. Behind each of these were thousands of little yellow splotches. Tam banked over and came round on a hairpin turn, with his eyes searching the heavens above and below. 1,000 feet beneath him was a straggling wisp of cloud, so tenuous that you saw the earth through its bulk. Above was a smaller cloud, not so transparent, but too thin to afford a lurking place for his enemy. Tam was waiting for that famous gentleman, the sausage killer, the sworn foe of all Beatses. He paid little attention to the flaming lines because the sausage killer never came direct from his aerodrome. You would see him streaking across the sky, apparently on his urgent way to the sea bases and oblivious of the existence of observation balloons. Then he would turn, as though he had forgotten his passport and railway ticket and must go home quickly to get them. And before anybody realized what was happening, he would be diving straight down at the straining gas bags, his tracer bullets would be ranging the line, and from every car would jump tiny black figures. You saw them falling straight as plummets till their parachutes took the air and opened. And there would be a great blazing and burning of balloons, frantic work at the winches which pulled them to earth, and the ballooning section would send messages to the aerodrome whose duty it was to protect them, apologizing for awakening the squadron from its beauty sleep, but begging to report that hostile aircraft had arrived, had performed its dirty work and had departed with apparent immunity. The sausage killer was due at 11:20, and at 11:18 Tam saw one solitary airplane sweep wide of the balloon park, and turn on a course which would bring him along the line of the O.B.s. Apparently, the sausage killer was not so blessed in the matter of sight as Tam, for the scout was on his tail and was pumping nickel through his tractor's screw before the destroyer of innocent gas bags realized what had happened. It was a noble end, said Tam after he had landed, and no, so sure that he would have cared to be counted in any other circumstances, for the shepherd likes to die amongst his sheep and the captain on his bridge, and this queer feller was vera content, I've no doot, to crash under the een of his wee. Did you kill him, Tam? Asked Blackie. No, so sure he's dead in the corporeal sense, said Tam cautiously, but he is removed from the role of effectives. So far from being dead, the sausage killer, who, appropriately enough, was ludicrously like a young butcher, with his red fat face and his cold blue eye, was very much alive and had a grievance. Where did that man drop from? He demanded truculently. I didn't see him. I'm sorry, said Blackie, if we had known that, we would have got him to ring a bell or wave a flag. That is frivolous, said the German officer severely. It is the best we can do, dear lad, said Blackie, and didn't trouble to invite him to lunch. Tam, you've done so well, said the squadron leader at that meal, that I can see you being appointed official guardian angel to the O.B.s. They are going to bring you some flowers. And a testimonial with a purse of gold, suggested Croucher, the youngest of the flyers. No, desire and popularity, said Tam modestly, 'tis against ma principles to accept any other presents than cigars, and even these loath to accept unless they're good ones. He looked at his wrist watch, folded his serviette and rose from the mess table with a little nod to the president. It was a gratifying fact, which Blackie had remarked, that second lieutenant, late sergeant, Tam, had taken to the mess as naturally as a duck to water. He showed neither awkwardness nor shyness, but this was consonant with his habit of thought. Once attune your mind to the reception of the unexpected, so that even the great and vital facts of life and death leave you unshaken and unamazed, and the lesser quantities are adjusted with ease. Tam had new quarters, his Batman had become his servant, certain little comforts which were absent from the bunk were discoverable in the cozy little room he now occupied. His day's work was finished and he was bound on an expedition which was 1 part business and 9 parts joy ride, frank and undisguised, for the squadron car had been placed at his disposal. The road to Amiens was dry, the sun was up, and the sky was blue, and behind him was the satisfactory sense of good work well done, for the sausage killer was at that moment on his way back to the base, sitting vis-a-vis with a grimy young military gentleman who cuddled a rifle and a fixed bayonet with one hand and played scales on a mouth organ with the other, softly, since he was a mere learner, and this was an opportunity for making joyful noises without incurring the opprobrium of his superiors. Tam enjoyed the beauty and freshness of the early afternoon, every minute of it. He drove slowly, his eyes wandering occasionally from the road to make a professional scrutiny of the skies. He spotted the lonely watches of 89 Squadron and smiled, for 89 had vowed many oaths that they would catch the sausage killer, and had even initiated a sweepstakes for the lucky man who crashed him. At a certain quiet restaurant on the Grand Place he found a girl waiting for him, a girl in soiled khaki, critically examining the menu. She looked up with a smile as the young man came in, hung his cap upon a peg and drew out the chair opposite. I have ordered the tea, though it is awfully early, she said. Now tell me what you have been doing all the morning. She spoke with an air of proprietorship, a tone which marked the progress of this strange friendship, which had indeed gone very far since Tam's violent introduction to Vera Larimore on the Amiens road. Wheel, said Tam, and hesitated. Please don't give me a dry report, she warned him. I want the real story, with all its proper fixings. Who shall start? Asked Tam. You start with the beginning of the day. Now, properly, Tam. Her slim finger threatened him. Is it literature ye'd be wanting? Asked Tam shyly. She nodded, and Tam shut his eyes and began after the style of an amateur elocutionist. The dawn broke fair and bonny and the fairest rays of the rising sun fell upon the sleeping sausage killer. Who is the sausage killer? Asked the girl, startled. He'll be the villain of the piece, I'm thinkin', said Tam, but if ye interrupt. I am sorry, murmured the girl, apologetically. She sat with her elbows on the table, her chin resting on her clasped hands and her eyes fixed on Tam, eyes that danced with amusement, with admiration, and with just that hint of tenderness that you might expect in the proud mother showing off the accomplishments of her firstborn. Fell aboot the hide of the sausage killer, Tam went on, bathin his shaven croon wi, saft radiance. There was a discreet tap at the door, and Wilhelm Macbethman, his faithful retainer, staggered in, bearin' his cup of acorn coffee. Rise, mine hair, says he, get oot o' bed, ma bonny laird. What o'clock is it, Angus? Says the sausage killer, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. It's 7, your majesty, says Macbethman. Shall I lay out yer synthetic sausage or shall I fry up yesterday's sauerkraut? But the sausage killer shakes his head. Mon Angus, he says, I've had a hideous dream. Dreamt, says he, that went for to kill a wee sausage and dived for him and missed him and before could recover, the sausage bit me. 'Tis a warning, says he. Sir, says Macbethman, trembling in every limb and even in his neck, ye'd be wise no, to go out the day. But the prud, sausage killer, rises himself to his full length. Unhand ma pants, Angus, says he, ma duty calls, and away goes the puir wee feller to meet his doom at the hands of the terror of the skies. That's you, said the girl. You're a good guesser, said Tam, pouring out the tea the waiter had brought. Do ye take sugar or are ye a victim of the cocktail habit? Did you kill him? Asked the girl. Politically and in a military sense the sausage killer is dead, said Tam. As a human being he is still alive, being detained during His Majesty's displeasure. You will tell me the rest, won't you? She pleaded. With her, Tam invariably ended his romances at the point where they could only be continued by the relation of his own prowess, and I'm glad you brought him down, it makes me shudder to see the balloons burning. Oh, and do you know they bombed number 131 last night? Ye don't say. There was amazement in his look, but there was pain, too. The traditions of the air service had become his traditions. A breach of the unwritten code by the enemy was almost as painful a matter to him as though it was committed by one of his own comrades. For his spiritual growth had dated from the hour of his enlistment, and that period of life wherein youth absorbs its most vivid and most eradicable impressions, had coincided with the 2 years he had spent in his new environment. He understood nothing of the army and its intimate life, of its fierce and wholesome code. He could only wonder at the courage and the endurance of those men on the ground who were cheerful in all circumstances. They amazed and in a sense depressed him. He had been horrified to see snipers bayoneted without mercy, without being given a chance to surrender, not realizing that the sniper is outside all concession and cannot claim any of the rough courtesies of war. He had placed his enemy on a pedestal, and it hurt almost as much to know that the German fell short of his conception as it would have, had one of his own comrades been guilty of an unpermissible act. Hospitals had been bombed before, but there was a chance that the wandering night bird had dropped his pills in ignorance of what lay beneath him. Of late, however, hospitals and clearing stations had been attacked with such persistence that there was very little doubt that the enemy was deliberately carrying out a hideous plan. Ye don't say, he repeated, and the girl noticed that his voice was a little husky. Were ye? He hesitated. I was on convoy duty, fortunately, said the girl, but that doesn't save you in the daytime, and I have been bombed lots of times, although the red cross on the top of the ambulance is quite clear, isn't it? Tam nodded. There was no damage, he asked anxiously. Not very much in one way, she said. He missed the hospital but got the surgery, and poor Hector. She stopped, and he saw tears in her eyes. Ye don't tell me, he asked, startled. She nodded. Queer Hector, well, that's too bad, queer wee little feller. Everybody is awfully upset about it, he was such a cheery little chap. He was killed quite nastily. She hesitated to give the grisly details, but Tam, who had seen the effect of high explosive bombs, had no difficulty in reconstructing the scene where Hector laid down his life for his adopted country. When he got back to the aerodrome that night, he found that the bombing of hospitals was the subject which was exciting the mess to the exclusion of all others. It's positively ghastly that a decent lot of fellows like German airmen can do such diabolical things, said Blackie. We are so helpless. We can't go along and bomb his collecting stations. Fritz's material is deteriorating, said a wing commander. There's not enough gentlemen to go round. Everybody who knows Germany expected this to happen. You don't suppose fellows like Boltke or Immelmann or Richthofen would have done such a swinish thing? That same night 131 was bombed again, this time with more disastrous effects. One of the raiders was brought down by Blackie himself, who shot both the pilot and the observer, but the raid was only one of many. The news came through in the morning that a systematic bombing of field hospitals had been undertaken from Ypres to the Somme. At 2 o'clock that afternoon Blackie summoned his squadron. There's a retaliation stunt on tonight, he explained. We are getting up a scratch raid into Germany. You fellows will be in for it. Tam, you will be my second in command. At 10 o'clock that night the squadron rose and headed eastward. The moon was at its full, but there was a heavy ground mist, and at 6,000 feet a thin layer of clouds which afforded the raiders a little cover. Tam was on the left of the diamond formation, flying 1,000 feet above the bombers, and for an hour and a half his eyes were glued upon the signal light of his leader. Presently their objective came into sight, a spangle of lights on the ground. You could follow the streets and the circular sweep of the big central Platz and even distinguish the bridges across the Rhine. Then of a sudden the lights blurred and became indistinct, and Tam muttered an impatient "tchk," for the squadron was running into a cloud bank which might be small but was more likely to be fairly extensive. They were still able to distinguish the locality, until 3 spurts of red flame in the very center of the town marked the falling of the first bombs. Then all the prominent lights went out. There were hundreds of feeble flickers from the houses, but after a while these too faded and died. In their place appeared the bright, staring faces of the searchlights as they swept the clouds. Tam saw the flash of guns, saw the red flame flowers of the bombs burst to life and die, and straining his eyes through the mist caught the return signal of his leader. He banked round and ran into a thicker pall of fog and began climbing. As he turned he saw a quick, red, angry flash appear in the clouds and something whistled past his head. The guns had got the altitude of the bombers to a nicety and Tam grinned. By this time Blackie's lights were out of sight and Tam was alone. He looked down at his compass and the quivering needle now pointed to his right, which meant he was on the homeward track. He kept what he thought was a straight course, but the needle swung round so that it pointed toward him. He banked over again to the right and swore as he saw the needle spin round as though some invisible finger was twirling it. Now the airplane compass is subject to fits of madness. There are dozens of explanations as to why such things occur, but the recollection of a few of these did not materially assist the scout. The thing to do was to get clear of the clouds and take his direction by the stars. He climbed and climbed, until his aeronometer pointed to 20,000 feet. By this time it was necessary to employ the apparatus which he possessed for sustaining himself at this altitude. It was amazing that the clouds should be so high, and he began to think that his aeronometer was out of order when he suddenly dived up into the light of a cold moon. He looked around, seeking the pole star, and found it on his left. So all the time he had been running eastward. And then his engine began to miss. Tam was a philosopher, and a philosopher never expects miracles. He understood his engine as a good jockey understands his horse. He pushed the nose of his machine earthward and planed down through an interminable bank of clouds until he found a grey countryside running up to meet him. There were no houses, no lights, nothing but a wide expanse of country dotted with sparse copses. There was sufficient light to enable him to select a landing place, and he came down in the middle of a big pasture on the edge of a forest of gaunt trees. He unstrapped himself and climbed down, stretching his limbs before he took a gentle trot around the machine to restore his circulation. Then he climbed back into the fuselage and tinkered at the engine. He knew what was wrong and remedied the mischief in a quarter of an hour. Then he inspected his petrol supply and whistled. He had made a rough calculation and he knew within a few miles how far he was in the interior of Germany, and by the character of the country he knew he was in the marshy lands of Usenberg, and there was scarcely enough petrol to reach the Rhine. He left his machine, slipped an automatic pistol into the pocket of his overall and went on a voyage of exploration. Half a mile from where he landed, he struck what he gathered was a high road and proceeded cautiously, for the high road would probably be patrolled, the more so if the noise of his machine had been correctly interpreted, though it was in his favor that he had shut off his engines and had planed down for 5 miles without a sound. There was nobody in sight. To the left the road stretched in the diffused moonlight, a straight white ribbon unbroken by any habitation. To the right he discerned a small hut, and to this he walked. He had taken a dozen steps when a voice challenged him in German. At this point the road was sunken and it was from the shadow of the cutting that the challenge came. "Hello," said Tam in English, and a little figure started out. Tam saw the rifle in his hand and caught the glitter of a bayonet. "You English," said a voice. "Scotch," said Tam severely. "Aha." There was a note of exultation. "You English escaped prisoner. I have you arrested and with me to the commandant of Camp 74 you shall go." "Is it English you're speakin'?" said Tam. The little man came closer to him. He stood 4 feet 3 and he was very fat. He wore no uniform, and was evidently one of those patriotic souls who undertake spare time guard duty. His presence was explained by his greeting. Some men had escaped from the German prison camp 7 miles away and he was one of the sentries who were watching the road. "You come mit me, Vorwärts." Tam obeyed meekly and stepped out to the hut. "I keep you here. Presently the Herr Leutnant will come and you shall go back." He walked into the hut and waited in silence while the little man struck a match and lit an oil lamp. The sentry fixed the glass chimney and turned to face the muzzle of Tam's automatic pistol. "Sit down, Maui Fryan," said Tam, "let ma take that gun away from ye before a Herr Yersel, merciful, heavens." He was staring at the little man, but it was not the obvious terror of the civilian which fascinated him, it was the big, white, and shaven face, the long upper lip, and the low corrugated brow under the stiff bristling hair, the small twinkling eyes, and the broad, almost animal, nose that held him for a moment speechless. "Hector O'Brien," gasped Tam, and almost lost his grasp of the situation in the discovery of this amazing likeness. Thought ye was dead," said Tam. "Oh, Hector, we have missed ye." The little man, his shaking hands uplifted, could only chatter incoherently. It needed this to complete the resemblance to the deceased mascot of 131. "Ma queer wee man," said Tam, as he scientifically tied the hands of his prisoner, "so the Germans got ye after all. You shall suffer great punishment." His prisoner was spurred by fear to offer a protest. "Presently the Herr Leutnant will come with his motor car." "God bless ye for those encouraging words," said Tam. "Now will ye tell me how many soldiers are coming along?" 4, 6, began the prisoner. "Make it 10, said Tam, examining the magazine of his pistol. Can manage 10, but if there's 11, shall have to fight, I am in a vulgar way ma fists." "Ye'll sit here," said he, "and ye will not speak." He went to the untidy bed, and taking a coarse sacking sheet he wound it about the man's mouth. Then he went to the door and waited. Presently he heard the hum of the car, and saw 2 twinkling lights coming from the eastward. Nearer and nearer came the motor car and pulled up with a jerk before the hut. There were 2 men, a chauffeur and an officer, cloaked and overcoated, in the tonneau. The officer opened the door of the car and stepped down. "Franz," he barked. Tam stepped out into the moonlight. Is it Ma Fryan, you're calling? He asked softly. And will ye pit up yer hands? Who, demanded the officer. Dinna make a noise like an owl, said Tam, or you will frighten the wee birdies. Get out of that, McCluskey. This to the chauffeur. He marched them inside the hut and searched them. The officer had come providentially equipped with a pair of handcuffs, which Tam used to fasten the well-born and the low-born together. Then he made an examination of the car, and to his joy discovered 6 cans of petrol, for in this deserted region where petrol stores are non-existent a patrol car carries 2 days' supply. He brought his 3 prisoners out, loosened the bonds of the little man, and after a little persuasion succeeded in inducing his 3 unwilling porters to carry the tins across a rough field to where his plane was standing. In what persiflage he indulged, what bitter and satirical things he said of Germans and Germany is not recorded. They stood in abject silence while he replenished his store of petrol and then, "Up wi, ye," said he to Hector O'Brien's counterpart. "For why?" asked the affrighted man. "Up wi, ye," said Tam sternly, "climb into that seat and fix the belt around ye, quick, I'm taking ye back to yer home." His pistol point was very urgent and the little man scrambled up behind the pilot's seat. "Now, you, McCluskey," said Tam, following him and deftly strapping himself, "ye'll turn that propeller, pull it down so, do ye hear me, ye miserable chauffeur." The man obeyed. He pulled over the propeller blade twice, then jumped back as with a roar the engine started. As the airplane began to move, first slowly and then gathering speed with every second, Tam saw the 2 men break into a run toward the road and the waiting motor car. Behind him he felt rather than heard slight grunts and groans from his unhappy passenger, and then at the edge of the field he brought up the elevator and the little Scout, roaring like 1,000 express trains, shot up through the mist and disappeared from the watchers on the road in the low-hanging clouds, bearing to the bereaved and saddened staff of 131 Hector O'Brien's understudy. Chapter XTHE Last Load. Along a muddy road came an ambulance. It was moving slowly, zigzagging from side to side to avoid the shell holes and the subsidences which the collapse of ancient trenches on each side of the road had caused. It was a secondary or even a tertiary road, represented on the map by a spidery line, and was taken by driver Vera Larimore because there was no better. From the rear end of the ambulance showed 8 muddy soles, 3 pairs with toes upturned, the 4th at such an angle, 1 foot with the other, as to suggest a pain beyond any but this mute expression. On the tailboard of the ambulance an orderly of the R.A.M.C. balanced himself, gaunt-eyed, and shaven, caked from head to foot in yellow mud, the red cross on his untidy brassard looming faintly from its grimy background. Beyond the soles with their worn and glaring nails, a disorderly rumple of brown army blankets, and between the stretchers a confusion of entangled haversacks, water bottles and equipment, there was nothing to be seen of the patients, though a thin blue haze which curled along the tilt showed that one at least was well enough to smoke. The ambulance made its slow way through the featureless country, past rubble heaps which had once been the habitations of men and women, splintered trunks of poplar avenues, great excavations where shells of an immense caliber had fallen long ago and the funnel shapes of which were now overgrown with winter weeds. Presently the ambulance turned onto the main road and 5 people heaved a sigh of thankfulness, the 6th, he of the eloquent souls, being without interest in anything. The car with its sad burden passed smoothly along the broad level road, such a road as had never been seen in France or in any other country before the war, increasing its speed as it went. Red-capped policemen at the crossroads held up the traffic, guns and mechanical transport, mud-splashed staff cars and tramping infantry edged closer to the side to let it pass. Presently the car turned again, swept past a big aerodrome. The girl who drove through one quick glance, had a glimpse of the parade ground but did not recognize the man she hoped to see, and a few minutes later she was slowing the ambulance before the reception room of General Hospital 131. The R.A.M.C. man dismounted, nodded to other R.A.M.C. men more tidy, more shaven, and a little envious it seemed of their comrades' dishabille, and the 4 cases were lifted smoothly and swiftly and carried into the big hut. "All right, driver," said the R.A.M.C. Sergeant, when 4 stretchers and 8 neatly folded blankets had been put into the ambulance to replace those she had surrendered, and Vera, with a little jerk of her head, sent the car forward to the park. She brought her machine in line with one of the 4 rows, checked her arrival and walked wearily over to her quarters. She had been out that morning since 4, she had seen sights and heard sounds which a delicately nurtured young woman, who 3 years before had shuddered at the sight of a spider, could never in her wildest nightmare imagine would be brought to her sight or hearing. She was weary, body and soul, sick with the nausea which is incomparable to any other. And now she was at the end of it. Her application for long leave had followed the smashing up of her airman brother and his compulsory retirement in England. And yet she could not bear the thought of leaving all this, the horror and the wonder of it were alike fascinating. She felt the same pangs of remorse she had experienced on the one occasion she had run away from school. She branded herself as a deserter and looked upon those who had the nerve and will to stay on with something of envy. Her plain-spoken friend was sitting on her bed in a kimono as the girl came in. "Well?" she asked. "Well, what?" asked Vera irritably. "Are you sorry you were leaving us?" "I haven't left yet," said the girl, sitting down and unstrapping her leather leggings slowly. "You don't go till tomorrow, that's true," said the other girl calmly, "and how have you rounded off all your little friendships?" There was just the slightest of pauses between the 2 last words. "You mean Lieutenant McTavish?" asked Vera distraitly. "I mean Tam," said the girl with a nod. "Exactly what do you mean by rounded off?" The other girl laughed. "Well, there are many ways of a friendship," she smiled. "There's the, if you come to my town look me up, way. There's the, you'll write every day, way, and," she hesitated again. "Go on," said Vera calmly. "And there's, well, the conventional way." Vera smiled. "I can't imagine Tam doing anything conventional," she said. Elizabeth jumped up with a laugh, walked to the little bare dressing table and began brushing her hair. "Why do you laugh?" asked Vera. "The whole thing's so curious," replied the girl. "Here's a man who is head over heels in love with you." "In love with me?" Vera Larimore went red and white by turns and lost, for a moment, her grasp of the situation, then grew virtuously indignant, which was a tactical error, for if she were innocent of such a thought as that which her friend expressed she should have been either amused or curious. "How can you talk such rubbish? Tam and I are jolly good friends. He is a real fine man, as straight as a die and as plucky as he's straight. He has more sense, more judgment." She was breathless. "Spare me the catalogue of his virtues," said Elizabeth dryly. "I grant he is perfection and therefore unlovable. All that I asked you out of sheer idle curiosity was, how is your friendship to be rounded off?" Vera was silent. "I shall see him tonight, of course," she said with a fine air of unconcern, "and I hope we shall part the best of friends, but as to his being in love with me, that is nonsense." "Of course it is," said Elizabeth soothingly. "What makes you think he is in love with me?" Vera asked suddenly. "Symptoms." "But what symptoms?" "Well, you are always together. He drops bunches of flowers for you on your birthday." "Pshaw," said Vera scornfully. "I thought you had more knowledge of men and women. That is friendship." "Ha, ha," laughed Elizabeth politely. "But honestly," asked Vera, "what makes you think so?" "I won't tell you any more," said the girl, turning around and tying her hair, "but I will put a straight question to you, my dear, do you love Tam?" "Of course not." Vera was red. "You are making me very uncomfortable. I tell you he is a good friend of mine and I respect him enormously." "And you don't love him?" "Of course I don't love him. What a stupid thing to imagine." "Such things have happened," said the girl. "I have never thought of such a thing," said Vera, "but suppose I did, of course it's an absurd idea, but suppose I did." "If I were you and I did," said the girl, "I should tell him so." "Elizabeth. It sounds bold, doesn't it? But I will tell you why I make that suggestion, because if you don't tell him he won't tell you. You see, my dear, you are a very rich young woman, a very well-educated young woman, you have a social position and a large number of friends. Tam is a self-educated man, with no money and very few prospects and no social position, and, as you say, he is straight and honest." "He is the straightest and most honest man in the world," said Vera warmly. Well, in those circumstances can't you see, he would no more think of asking for you than he would of calling at Buckingham Palace and demanding the Kohinoor. In America, said Vera, we haven't those absurd ideas. Oh, shucks, said Elizabeth contemptuously. You seem to forget I was born in Pennsylvania. And there the conversation ended, and for the rest of the day Vera was silent and thoughtful, excusing her taciturnity by the fact that she had a lot of packing to do and needed to concentrate her mind upon its performance. The mortal foe to instinct is reason. They are the negative and positive of mental volition. The man who retains the animal gift of unreasoning divination, preserving that clear power against the handicaps which mind training and education impose, is necessarily psychic, or, as they say in certain Celtic countries, fey. Tam went up on patrol flying a new Hup, a tiny machine powerfully engined, which climbed at an angle of 50 degrees and at a surprising speed. He pushed up through a fog bank at 3,000 feet and reached blue skies. His engine was running sweetly, there was just the give in his little chaser, the indefinable resilience which a good machine should possess. His guns were in excellent order, his controls worked smoothly, but Tam was at a loss how to proceed from that, but he turned the nose of the Hup to earth and planed down to the aerodrome. Blackie left the machine he was about to take and walked across to Tam. Anything wrong? He asked. Wheel, replied Tam cautiously, I'd no go so far as to say that there's very much wrong the young fellow. Blackie looked at him keenly. Engines. Tam shook his head. No, they were working bonnily, there's nothing to complain about, only I just felt that Hup, and Tam was no thinkin' the same way. Oh, said Blackie. He examined the machine, a new one, with the greatest care, tested the controls, examined and sounded stays and struts and shook his head. Take up Bartholomew's machine, he went sick this morning, he said. Tam superintended the preparation of Lieutenant Bartholomew's Hup, and climbing in gave the signal. What's the matter with Tam? Thornycroft, a flight commander of 89A, had strolled across and stood with Blackie watching Tam's tiny machine humming cloudward. Tam has what is called on the other side a hunch, said Blackie, come and look at this machine and see if you can find anything wrong with it. She's new from the maker, he went on. In fact, the young gentleman who represents the firm is at this moment in the mess laying down the law on aviation, its past, present and illimitable future. There he is. Thornycroft paused in his inspection to watch the newcomer. He was a young man of singular confidence, who talked so very loudly to the officer who accompanied him that the two men by the machine felt themselves included in the conversation long before they could make themselves audible in reply. Hello, said Mr. Theodore Mann, what's wrong, eh? One of my best pilots took her up and didn't like her, said Blackie. Didn't like her? What's wrong with her? Cold feet, eh? Bless you, they all get it sooner or later, the pitcher goes off into the well, etc. That's a proverb that every flying man should unlearn, eh? He leapt lightly into the machine and jiggled the joystick. I'll take her up if you don't mind. Hi, you. He called a mechanic. Start her up. Ready, contact. ZRRR. The little bird skimmed the smooth floor of the aerodrome and dived upward in a wide circle. She's all right, said Thornycroft, shading his eyes. What's wrong with Tam, I wonder? Tam doesn't funk a thing, protested Blackie. I've never known him, my God. Apparently nothing happened, only the machine without warning buckled up and broke 2,000 feet in the air. A wing dropped off and a crumpled thing, which bore no resemblance to an airplane, dropped straight as a plummet to earth. It fell less than 100 yards from the aerodrome and Mr. Theodore Mann was dead when they pulled him from the wreckage. Blackie directed the salvage work and returned a very thoughtful man. When Tam returned from his tour he sent for him. You have heard the news, I suppose. Tam nodded gravely. Now, tell me, Tam, said Blackie, did you feel anything wrong with the machine? Why did you bring her down? Sir, said Tam, all no romance and, I'm tellin' ye flyin' core truth. I saw nothin' and, felt nothin', the engines were guide and, sweet and, she swung like a leady, but. Wheel, what would ye say if ye were zoomin' up and, of a sudden, for no reason, your hair stood up and your flesh went creepy and your mouth grew as dry as Sunday morning. And there was a cold sensation under your belt and the skin aboot your eyes was all strained and ye smelt things and tasted things sharper, as if all your senses was racin' like the propeller of a boat when her bow goes under water. Blackie shivered. That's how you felt, eh? He asked. Well, you needn't explain further, Tam. 'Tis the airman's 66th sense, said Tam. If he's worried or sad that 66th sense gets thrown up and becomes more vivid, if ye'll understand me. Worried. Sad, said Blackie quickly. What's worrying you, Tam? Haven't you had your pay this month? Tam smiled slowly. What that young fellow, Cox, is doing ma fortune doesna keep me awake at nights, he said. The MacTavishes are feckless, extravagant bodies and it no concerns me whether ma balance is 1 pound or 2. What is worrying you? Asked Blackie. Weel, said Tam slowly, I'm just a wee bit grieved. A Fryan, mine is leaving France. Friend of yours, said Blackie. Who is your friend? He is a broad big fellow about 6 foot high muscular arms and curly hair, said Tam. His name's Jamie McFarlane, and his mither's a leddy in her own right. Thus embarked upon his career of mendacity, the artist in Tam compelled him to complete the picture. We were at school together, Angus and A. You said Jamie just now, Tam, reproved Blackie. Angus is his second name, said the glib Tam. We were brought up in the same village, the village of Lasky, and tramped off to the same college at 6 every morning when the bummer went. There'd we sit, me and Alec. Angus, suggested Blackie. Me and Alec Angus Jamie McFarlane, said the undisturbed Tam, listenin' wiger ears to the discourses of Professor Ferguson who took the chair in rivets at the Govan Iron Works Seminary, drinkin' out of the same mug. Tam, you're lying, said Blackie. What is really worrying you and who's your friend? Tam heaved a sigh. Weel, he said, shall be wanting to go into Amiens, tonight, Captain Blackie, Sir and have a ground poem at the back of me hide that I'd like to be writing. You'll know, be wanting me. Not till 4, said Captain Blackie, I want you to stand by then in case Fritz tries something funny. The circus paid a visit to 89 yesterday evening and it may be our turn tonight. Tam closed and locked the door of his room, produced a large pad of writing paper, an inkwell, and fitted his pen with a new nib before he began his valedictory poem. Never had a poem been more difficult to write to this ready versifier. He crossed out and rewrote, he destroyed sheet after sheet before the rough work of his hands was ready for polishing. How may a puir wee airman fly when ye have carried off his sky? The verse began, and perhaps those were the 2 most extravagant lines in the farewell verse. He wrote a fair copy, folded it carefully, inserted it into an envelope and slipped it into his breast pocket. He was to see Vera that night and had no other feeling but one of blank helplessness, for he had neither the right nor the desire to reveal by one word his closely guarded secret, a secret which he fondly believed was shared by none. His plan was to give her the envelope on the promise that it should not be opened and read until she had reached America. He had invented and carefully rehearsed certain cautious words of farewell, so designed that she might accept them on the spot as conventional expressions of his regret at her leaving, but pondering them afterward, could discover in these simple phrases a hint of his true sentiment. Such was the difficulty of composition that he was late for parade. All the squadron which was not actually engaged in routine duty was present. Ordinarily they would have been dismissed after the briefest wait, but today Blackie kept gunners, observers and pilots standing by their machines. At 4:30 Blackie hurried across from his office. There's a general alarm, he said. Everybody is to go up. Tam, take number 6 and patrol the area. As the machines rose a big motor car came flying onto the ground and 2 staff officers alighted. Blackie turned and saluted his brigadier. We only just got the message through, sir, he said. The general nodded. It was signaled to me on the road, he said, I expected it. Who is in charge of that flight? Mr. McTavish, sir. Tam, eh? The general nodded his approval. The circus is getting big and bold, he said. Fritz has a new machine and he is making the most of it. There they come, the beauties. He slipped his field glasses from the case at his belt and focused them upon the sky. The enemy came, a graceful V-shaped flight of monstrous geese, throbbing and humming, and the wandering patrols above changed direction and flew to meet them. As at a signal the V parted at the fork, each angle divided and subdivided into two, so that where one broad arrowhead had been, were 4 diamonds. The anti-aircraft guns were staining the evening skies brown and white till the attacking squadrons came gliding like tiny flies into the disturbed area, when the gunfire ceased. And now friend and enemy were so mixed that it needed an expert eye to distinguish them. They circled, climbed, dived, looped over and about one another, and it seemed as if the tendency of the oncoming wave was to retire. "They're going. They've had enough," said the general. 2 machines were wobbling to earth, one in a blaze, whilst a third planed down toward the enemy's lines. The fighters were going farther and farther away, all except 3 machines that seemed engaged in weaving an invisible thread one about the other. Under and over, round, up, down, and all the time the ceaseless chatter of machine guns. Then one side slipped, recovered and dropped on his tail to earth. The fight was now between 2 machines, the maneuvers were repeated, the same knitting of some queer design until... "Got him!" yelled the general. The German plane fell in that slow spiral which told its own tale to the expert watchers. Then suddenly his nose went down and he crashed. "Who's the man?" "Tam, for a ducat." Blackie nodded. Tam's machine was planing down to earth. "He'll miss the aerodrome," said the general. "That's not Tam's way of returning at all," said Blackie with knitted brows. The machine dropped in the very field where the sausage killer had been brought down a week before. It did not skim down but landed awkwardly, swaying from side to side until it came to a standstill. Blackie was racing across the field. He reached the machine and took one glance at the pilot. Then he turned to the mechanic who followed at his heels. "Phone an ambulance," he said, "they've got Tam at last." For Tam sat limply in his seat, his chin on his breast, his hand still clasped about the bloody grip of his machine gun. The matron beckoned Vera. "Here's your last job, Vera," she said with a smile. "Take your car to the aerodrome. One of the pilots has been killed." Vera stared. At the aerodrome. Control it as she might, her voice shook. "Yes, didn't you see the fight in the air? I came out as it was finishing. Oh, may I take the ambulance?" The matron looked at her in wonder. "Yes, child, take the Stafford car." She nodded to an ambulance which waited on the broad drive. Without another word Vera ran to the car and cranked it up. As she climbed into the driver's seat she felt her knees trembling. "Please God, it isn't Tam," she prayed as she drove the little car along the aerodrome road. "Not Tam, dear Lord, not Tam." And yet, by the very panic within her she knew it was Tam and none other. "To the left, I think." She looked round in affright. She had been oblivious to the fact that a doctor had taken his seat by her side. It was as though he had emerged from nothingness and had assumed shape and substance as he spoke. She turned her wheel mechanically, bumped across a little ditch and passed through a broken fence to where a knot of men were regarding something on the ground. She hardly stopped the ambulance before she leapt out and pushed her way through the group. "Tam," she whispered, and at that moment Tam opened his eyes. He looked in wonder from face to face, then his eyes rested on the girl. She was down on her knees by his side in a second and her hand was under his head. "Tam," she whispered and thrilled at the look which came into his blue eyes. Then before them all she bent her head and kissed him. From which moment, said Blackie afterward, Tam began one of the most remarkable recoveries medical science has ever recorded. He had 3 bullets through his chest, 1 through his shoulder blade, and 2 of his ribs were broken. Tam closed his eyes. "Vera," he murmured. She looked up, self-possessed, and eyed Blackie steadily as the doctor stooped over the stricken man on the other side and gingerly felt for the wounds. "Tam is going to live, Captain Blackie," she said, "because he knows I want him to, don't you, dear?" "Aye, lassie," said Tam faintly. Because, she said, "we are going to be married, aren't we, Tam?" He nodded and she stooped to listen. "Say it, in Scotch." She said it, in his ear, her eyes bright and shining, her face as pink as the sunset flooding the scene, and then she got up to her feet and they lifted the stretcher and slid it gently into the grooved guides on the floor of the ambulance. "Now, driver," said the doctor with a little smile. She went to her place and mounted to the seat. The hands that touched the polished wheel trembled and she slipped back to the ground again, her face white. I can't drive him," she said and burst into tears upon Blackie's shoulder. So Blackie drove the car himself and left his general to wipe Vera's eyes. A month later Captain Blackie went to Havre to see Tam en route for home. "You're a wonderful fellow, Tam, you ought to be dead really instead of being bound for England." "Scotland," corrected Tam. "But don't you think you're lucky?" "Weel," said Tam, "I did until the morn, then I struck a vera bad patch." "Bad luck," said the innocent and surprised Blackie. "I am sorry to hear that." "What happened?" "The big feller, the principal doctor," said Tam, "said I might smoke a wee cigar, and, believe me, Captain Blackie, sirrah, when I looked in ma pooch there wasna a single." Blackie took his cigar case from his pocket, opened and extended it. "Tam," he said, "you're nearly well." The end.